In the former room, DivineProspect was trying to say something. He yielded the floor to me because he's such a gentleman. But I did want to hear him. You have the floor, Divine, to say what you wish.
Yeah, I appreciate that, y'all. And I want to say I respect Abba Eban for even being here and engaging with us outside of the previous room, even though, Joel was a mod. That goes to show that, you generally want to build. So I do appreciate that. And of course, I need somebody to go have a discourse back and forth because Mordecai is not here. And who was the other guy that was in here with Abba? And was it Mayor? He's not here. I think he's in the previous room I was in or whatever. So are you willing to have a dialogue in regards to the Mishnah, Abba Eban?
Yeah, we can start and see where it goes.
Okay.
Let's see how it goes. I'm gonna try to sort of I'm gonna give the answers that I know to give from
Yeah,
my
that's
learning.
fine.
I hope those are
That's fine.
gonna be okay. I'll do my best to sort of bring sources and evidence that
Yeah,
that might
it
be okay.
suffices.
In other words, nobody has to take my word for it, but just I am a rabbi. I've been a rabbi for 10 years. Lived my life as a religious Jew, so I'm not making stuff up.
Hey, John.
Okay, so
So you know,
I'll do my best.
Wednesday's Terry's
I'll do
last
my
day,
best.
right? Wednesday.
Oh,
No, sorry, Tuesday.
somebody has to mute Priest
Do you need
Ayala
any
real
days
quick.
off before then? Because it's gonna be tough.
Okay, go ahead, Abba.
No, I'm just saying I have no problem talking about books in my tradition and how they work. I'll do the best that
Yeah,
I
and
can.
that's all I'm asking, right? So there's different ways to critically analyze and evaluate what we call the Talmud, right, which consists of both the Mishnah and the Gemara, right, and in a wider sense, the Midrashim and others, right. So my beef is not, and when I say beef, I'm using that loosely, right? That's not really an egregious issue, but it's not necessarily the nature of the content and the methodology used to parse it out so one can then understand it, right? And again, the way the Talmud is written is so that certain elements are tokenized, right, or disguised from those who are not initiates. So there's some things on the surface may seem to read something in a cursory means, but the initiate has a different understanding based on the methodology used to
Divine,
interpret.
what do you mean by that? What do you mean there's things that are hidden from the
Okay,
uninitiated?
that's why I wish Mordecai was here. So, an example of that is you were going back and forth with Yoel, right? And you guys were having a discussion on a particular tractate, correct? Of the Gemara,
Yeah.
correct?
hmm
Okay,
hmm
and you gave an understanding, and he gave an understanding, right? So you
hmm
would say what he's reading is a cursory understanding. And what you are sharing is based on being trained to read the text based on a system of interpretation as it applies to the Gemara, right?
Yeah, I mean it's
So,
the system that the Gemara thinks you're going to read it in.
but that's what I'm saying. So that means
Yeah,
you being an initiate, somebody who is taught and trained and tutored to do this, there will be some insight and understanding and a way of interpreting what the rabbis are saying in the Gemara, as opposed to somebody who has not gone through that school of initiation, that
that's
method
right.
of so that's
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 right.
what I'm saying. Yeah. So
That's right.
that's what I'm saying. So I'm saying that because those go to yeshivas and they learn this type of methodology, right? Like you learn it in a not just like in a religious portion, but in a yeshiva where they actually take a look at it critically, right, and look into things that may be perceived one way from the outside, and how the system was set up internally, and be able to look at both sides, where they can give a more holistic response when inquiries come in, right, from either side. So what I'm saying is, I don't my issue is not necessarily how one interprets the Talmud, right? Consists of most of Mishnah and the Gemara. I have no qualms with that, right? And that's something we could discuss. Me personally, I do read the Mishnah, right? I read it for its there's value in it, right? Because it has preserved a time in history that without it we would be unknowledgeable on how certain things operate. The main premise that I have in dealing with that is its provenance, and that's what I mentioned earlier in the room. And I think we touched on a little bit of that, but I think the focal point was just the particular tractate that you and your well was going back and forth on. So my issue is provenance. Now, when I hear people say, "Oh, the Mishnah that we have today, and that's the key word, that we have today, goes all the way back to Moshe, and then from him, Yehoshua and others, that I have a problem with. Now, the current consensus in regards to the providence of the Mishnah, right, the what we call the oral tradition, or what's called Bepei Torah today, does not go back past Nehemiah. Like, that's like the origin of where it comes from, right? And then it evolves from there more formally during the Grecian period when the Israelites was in captivity, right? And
Divine,
I'll
I'm sorry
elaborate
to
on that.
interrupt, but before we get too far, do you mind if we pause for a sec
Okay,
and
go ahead.
just sort a couple things out?
Yeah, you got
Okay.
it.
So I agree. Yeah, yeah. So I agree with you that sort of when we look historically, right? When did texts like the Mishnah, right? Those particular teachings, when did they emerge in history? Right? We know, according to historians, we even know, according to the Mishnah and the Talmud itself, when those actually came on the scene in history as a discrete sort of um, set of instructions, right? And okay, the way that the tradition views the Mishnah, again, I want to be precise about this. Okay? The way that the tradition understands the Mishnah for itself, for its own purposes inside its own system, is that it got to the place that it did in the 2nd century because of an unbroken chain of tradition that goes all the way back to Moses that is listed in the first Mishnah of Mishnah Avot. Okay, pause here for again another second. Okay, so because your question about provenance, where does the provenance or the authority of that text come from? All over rabbinic literature, you will see that the rabbis all over the place are very clear on the idea that the oral Torah always accompanied the written Torah. Very
Correct. I'm
clear,
aware of that.
very, very
Okay.
clear about it. Now, you can challenge that in all kinds of ways if you like, right? And there are all kinds of ways that you might want to challenge that. However, what you cannot say, because it's a matter of fact, is that Jewish tradition itself believes that the oral Torah was given on Mount Sinai with the written
Yeah,
Torah.
yeah, I
Okay.
agree with that.
Now, so anytime that you want to sort of challenge that, all you're doing is challenging first premises, right? And that's what was my comments quite a bit in the last room, which is if you don't, if you're not on that page, right, and you're on a different kind of page about literalism and what's actually revelation and what's not, right, then it's going to be exceptionally challenging to understand the entire process of rabbinic teaching and how it works, because it relies on the idea that when Moses received the Torah, Moses also received oral from God, right? Oral teachings from God about how to study the Torah and particular interpretations of things that are only mentioned in brief. This is like a first principle. If you don't hold that first principle, you're going to be confused about how it can be that Baba Metzia 59 rabbis can read that verse seemingly against its natural context. But the reason that they can do it is because of this idea of oral Torah being given at the same time as written Torah. So, so last thing, and then I'll throw it back to you. So once you're going to challenge the sort of system itself, right, which is a legitimate challenge if you want, right, then you're not going to get at what the system is telling you from the inside. You're just shouting from the outside. If you want to understand from the inside, you have to get into that mindset before you can understand exactly what's going on. Because otherwise, you're just going to be using your rules of interpretation of dealing with the text and not really understanding how we do it.
No, and again, so I'll concede to a few points that you made in regards to internally, and that's when I laid my first premise, and I talked about the diametrically opposed positions on one of those who read it from a cursory perspective and those who read it from an initiatory perspective. Right? I laid that premise out initially, and I said that is not my qualm. Right? The issue that I take is provenance. Now, you have to have a presupposition, a predisposed presupposition that what exists today that's considered Mishnah is what Moshe had at that time that it was revealed to him at Mount Sinai. That is the problem.
I don't think I have to have that presupposition.
Why not? You just mentioned it. That's the only way you can understand it internally. That's what you just said, right?
Right. So let me try to expand. I don't think I have to say that Moses received exactly the words as of the Mishnah as we have today. And the reason I don't have to say that is because I understand that an oral tradition, it's transmitted even from the point of Sinai from God's mouth, is going to have certain flexibilities built into it to account for all of the situations that are going to happen in the future. In other words, the oral law is not only the content of the explanations of the Torah and the Halakha. The oral law is also the system of learning the Torah, the rules of learning the Torah.
And I'm gonna show
So,
you where that
so what
comes
we
from.
say, is, what we say, what we're confident about, or that we at least believe, or doctrine we say, right? The rules of interpreting the Torah minimally were given to Moses, and so and the rabbis of the Talmud and the Mishnah are making use of all those same rules.
Now wait,
And so,
stop right there. Stay right there. You
okay,
said
okay.
minimally. Can you please outline for us and highlight what those basic foundations are minimally that things were then built upon? Where can we get that source from?
You mean what are the rules of
No, the
interpretation?
ones you said that is minimally based off of what Moses received, right? So I'm saying,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what
So
what
there's
is those things
13.
that he received? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, there's 13 rules of interpretation that are taught in the name of Rabbi
No,
Yishmael,
does it come from
according to
Moshe? I'm saying.
again, if you're looking for explicit verses, okay, that say clearly, 100%, no doubt, right? I think you're going to be disappointed. And the reason you're going to be disappointed, sometimes we do that, right? Sometimes there's a verse that's very clear in use. Sometimes it's not that easy. And the reason you're going to be disappointed in that is precisely because of what I said before. That's not how we deal with the text. You're asking me to provide you something that adheres to your rules of interpretation of the text. And I've already told you I don't have the same rules.
No, but
I
I'm
don't.
not
I don't
even
think
talking
he's
about
asking that.
interpretation at this point. We're still dealing with provenance, and that
Yeah.
is what I'm the authenticity of the
So
provenance.
I understand.
Based
Wait,
on the
hold on, one thing at a time. Hold on. Let him say this
based
to you, Abba.
based on the presuppositional claim that it goes back to Moshe, and then it was
Mhm.
passed on. And Mordecai is there, right? Because he gave the hierarchy, right, of how that trickled down. And what I'm saying is, I find that problematic. And I'm going to tell you why. Intertextually, there are inconsistencies, and there's a formality of writing that we can see comes much later than that time period. And it comes, what we say, post exile, right? So it comes after the Babylonian exile, during the Achaemenid period, right? And from there, trickling down all the way until we get to the Seleucids and we get to the Ptolemies, right? And then after the Romans come on the scene, again, we have this sect that develops during the Greco-Roman period, right? That created a system of formality in regards to teaching, a structure. And I'm going to show you this, right? That is, I would say, analogous with what was happening during that time period in history when the Greeks was on the scene, structuring, organizing things as well. We see a very similar style in the Mishnah. And I want to share that with you right now. You don't have to accept this. And this is just how I critically analyze. I do the same thing with the written Torah, right? So there's nothing off the table for me. But what I'm saying is I have an issue because people need that first premise that you mentioned, that its providence comes from Moshe in order to accept everything else that trickles down from there. And I'm saying that
Yeah,
that's
that's right.
problematic. You're right. And I'm saying that's
No.
problematic.
That's totally, yeah, it's totally fine if you find that problematic. But once you already accept that, then everything inside of it works. And that's nobody, you don't have to be compelled by that, the fact that the tradition just accepts that as a presupposition. Presuppositions are not demonstrated in any logical system, right? In any system of learning, you don't justify the foundational things, the first principles. They are accepted or not accepted. That's it.
And that's problem. That's a big problem. That's why we have
No. It's not.
epistemology.
No. That's how epistemology works. You don't justify axioms.
No, but you have to be able to explain or reason with the axioms that exist in order to align yourself with it. So, for example,
No, I
if there's
don't.
an axiom, well, you don't have to, right? But I'm
No,
saying if you're
nobody
thinking
does.
critically,
Well, let
No,
him give
nobody
his
does.
example.
That's the point.
Let him give his example of why he believes you should, though.
Okay.
so I'm gonna do this. So, Abba, right? So that people are understanding what we're saying, define an axiom.
An axiom is the starting point of, in this kind of, in this scenario, it's the starting point that makes anything else that you're going to do intelligible.
So an axiom, right? And this is we're talking in colloquial terms. If y'all want to pull up the definition, you can, because the axiom works in mathematics slightly different than it does in linguistics, etc. But if we're going to use axiom as a first principle, that's what you're saying, right? A first principle that we can presuppose, because you need some foundation to begin any intelligible form of reasoning or communication or any system, right? And we agree on that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
Every
so
system, any system
correct,
needs first
correct.
principles.
So what I'm saying is those first principles that we're calling axioms, which is the foundational pillars that hold everything else up, I'm saying those can be critically analyzed. And in a system epistemology, in order to demonstrate what you know, you have to be able to showcase what those axioms are. So we highlight them. And then we go into start explaining it. Okay, how is those axioms established? And why should we agree or align ourselves to those axioms? One of those axioms that you mentioned is the fact that it came from Moshe. That is a justification for authority. And what I'm saying
Correct.
is that's,
That's right.
and I agree. And what I'm saying is I'm challenging that. And that's when I get pushback saying, no, you can't challenge that because you'll never understand. No, I
No.
read.
Listen.
Okay, go ahead.
Divine. You can challenge that all you want. It's totally fine. I don't care if you don't think that that has authority, but nevertheless, even if you don't think it's authority, right? You can still look at it. It doesn't prevent you from understanding it, right? But if you say, I don't think it has authority, and therefore I don't have to take any of what the book says seriously, then all you're doing is saying, I don't actually care how that system works because I'm just rejecting it
No,
all
no,
out
no.
of
And
hand.
I'm gonna let you know that's not my position. My position is when it is imposed. For example, right? If you talk to somebody and they say, "Wait, are you a Jew?" You're like, "Yeah, I'm a Jew." Right? What are some of the foundational things that is expected of somebody who identifies in 2023 as a Jew?
You're
To
asking
you,
me?
Abba. Yeah, to you.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. It has nothing to do with what a person believes.
Wait, what? Okay, go ahead. I'm gonna let you finish. I just make sure I heard
Okay,
that right.
listen
And
to that again.
that answer is kind of confusing.
Being a Jew, being a part of the Jewish people, right, is not a function of what you believe primarily. It's a function of tying yourself to the national destiny of a people. That people has a religion and traditions and practices. We call that Judaism, right? We call that living the Torah, the halakha. You can be a Jew and not do any of that stuff, or even be an atheist, and you are still a Jew. You still get counted in a prayer quorum. You can still have honors in synagogue. You have all the rights and privileges of an observant Jew, right? So it's not like you can just pick up and say one day, I decide to believe in the things that the Jews believe, and then you're part of the community. It's not how it works.
Ah, okay. Wait, let's stop right there. Got it. So now what you're doing is we're dealing with ethnicity and ethnicity tied to both secularism, because you could be a Jew ethnically and not practice Judaism, right? We agree on that, right? And then
I
you
mean,
could
you
be
asked me,
one.
how do you know if you're a Jew,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Well, I'm saying, and then you could be one who is pious, and then one who actually observes the things that's in halakha, right? Things that are law
Yeah, but there's
abiding for
no
Jews.
difference in status. Yeah, but there's no difference in status between those two people.
Okay, got it. No difference in status, right? So whether you're ethnically or a convert, there's no difference in status, correct?
Yep.
Okay, got it. So I'm gonna ask again. So what are some of the things that's expected of you? Let me say it like this, since you gave me a very wide reaching gamut to deal with. I'm a hone in and make it more central concentrated. So for those who are practicing Jews, ones who subscribe to Judaism, as termed secularly, right? What is expected of you in regards to those who follow that lineage? What is the expectation?
I mean, the expectation is to follow the law as explained over the generations by our many rabbis and scholars, right?
Gotcha.
And
So
there's,
when we say law, now we got to be more definitive. What do you mean when you
Mhm.
say law? You're not
I
just
mean,
referring to the written
yeah,
Torah.
what I
You're
mean
talking.
is,
Uh-huh.
what I mean is the entire system of interpretation that is
Ah,
composed and as out of a relationship between the written Torah and the
there you
oral
go. Why don't you
Torah,
just say that, Abba?
which is how we wait. Excuse me. Hang on a second. Wait a second. You think you've scored a
No, it's
point
not a
just there because
point.
I
I just
said
wanted you to
oral
say
Torah.
that so we can move
It's not
forward.
about
That's
that.
all, brother.
Not
Go
about
ahead.
that. It's not about scoring a
No, but
point.
you understand. But then you're going to go back, right? Here's where that goes next. You're going to say, "Oh, there's two different Torahs," and I'm going to say again, "Yeah, but it was given at the same time at Mount Sinai." And then we're back to the beginning again. And that is just a question of, do you accept that authority or not? That's fine. Don't accept it. No problem, right? But you asked, "How do we know what the law is?" And the factual answer, not the theological answer, the factual answer about Jewish law system and how it works is that it's built out of the interpretations of the rabbis across generations and the scholars about the meaning of the Torah and about its continuous ability to be applied in all places where Jews live, in all circumstances where Jews live, even as those circumstances change wildly from century to century, millennium to millennium, the social contexts change. If the Torah is really the eternal document of the Jewish people, then it should be able to withstand and accommodate all of the different situations that Jews have lived in the past, live in now, and will live in the future. So it requires, as you said, it's a presupposition. In order to do all of that, it requires this thing that we call the oral law. And they're not separate.
That's what I'm saying. It
They're a unit.
requires
They're a
that.
unit.
That's a
Yeah, yeah, it
prerequisite.
requires it. It's a
Okay, got
unit.
it.
It's a unit together, right? So that's how it works.
Gotcha. Okay. So and that's what I'm saying. So if I'm to be considered a practicing Jew, right? And for the record, do you identify Karaites as practicing observant Jews, even though they reject the rabbinic authority that's in the Talmud and from the sages? And
Sorry, you're breaking up. You're breaking up a little bit.
oh,
I'm
I'm breaking
missing
up.
every
Okay,
other
hold
word.
on.
Yeah, I'm missing every other word.
All right. I don't know if this is any better. Can y'all
Salaki.
hear me? Oh, go
Yeah, we
ahead.
can hear you better now. We can hear you better now. I just got a quick question. I don't really, it's not even off topic, so it won't take you guys anywhere. But I was just wondering, could Abba point to a scripture in the Torah that says that the law, the written law, has to be used along with the oral law? Like, is that written anywhere in the Torah?
You're not going to
You,
find a verse that
Yeshaya,
says
you're on mic.
explicitly,
Okay.
you're not going to find a verse explicitly that says you
Yo,
have to
yo,
do the
I'm
oral
sorry,
law with the
I'm
written
sorry,
law.
Abba. Abba, I'm sorry.
What?
G, when you come
No,
to
I'm
this
sorry.
stage,
I was just telling Yeshaya
you
that you were
can't
hot
unmute.
micing. I'm sorry.
Just mute your mic.
I'm sorry.
You can't
She's
come to
good.
this
She's cool.
and start talking, guys. There's a conversation going on. I've been trying to use a different style of room, so we got these open rooms now to bring in more listeners. It's more social, but please respect it by not just jumping in there. Let them complete their conversation. Wait until you're joined into the conversation by moderation. That's my only request. I don't mind you on stage. Abba, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're looking for an explicit verse that says the words of the Torah and the oral Torah in that kind of a way, I think you're going to be disappointed. What we do have is all kinds of verses about judges and appointing of judges. We have all kinds of verses about the Torah being placed in people's ears. We have all kinds of verses about Torah being placed in people's mouths, right? And this all points to, conceptually, ears and mouths. That points to out loud oral learning. There are also passages that speak about writing Torahs, right? So when we take all of those kind of together and we kind of thinking conceptually about those things together, right? What we get is a very two very seemingly obvious, at least according to us, kinds of things that the Torah itself is telling us what we should do. We should write down Torahs, right? And we should be teaching Torah. Teaching Torah doesn't mean just reading the verses. Teaching Torah means explaining them, figuring out how they work in law. It means something else, right? So I think that's how, again, I'm just trying to explain how the system works. I'm not saying you have to accept it, but if you're going to go on this thing of where's the verse, I think you're going to be a little bit disappointed if you think that the verse has to say it as directly as you want it to. There are verses. But again,
Understood.
all of those verses are still subject to the interpretive method of the rabbinic process. So I
Understood.
don't think you're gonna accept them.
Understood. But let me ask you something, Divine Prospect. I think this is what you're saying. For you to make the statement, the verses are subject to the rabbinical interpretive process, you have to get that from somewhere. Is that what you're saying, Divine?
Yeah, so what I'm pretty much wherever the source you're getting that process from, what I'm about to demonstrate once I get to read some sources is that the methodology or the form of teaching or instruction that people get when they learn like the oral Torah, that system does not go back to Moshe, right? It's a system that came into effect when the Jews was under Grecian captivity. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate, right?
You
Anybody that
can't
says
do
that,
that.
okay, you say we can't, okay, so and again, maybe Abba, it wasn't you I should have this conversation with. Actually, if you're okay, Abba, can you decline to Mordecai? Because he's the one that actually made that statement. And that's my brother Mordecai. I love you, my brother Mordecai. You still
Yeah,
my brother,
sure.
right?
Sure. Let me say one quick thing and I'll
Okay, go
pass it
ahead.
to Mordecai. Yeah, which is like, I want you to be careful, and this is important, I think, epistemologically, right? Be careful about when you're going to use sort of academic history, right? And when you're going to try to say what the traditional view is of Jewish tradition. Those two things might not always match up.
No, they're
Okay.
not going to, and I agree.
Right. So I want it to be clear though, right? And this is very, very important. If the goal here is to try to say, look, the way that you say it, rabbinic Jews, right, isn't the way that I can demonstrate it in history, right? Well, I think most of us are just going to say, yeah, so what? That's fine. We still have our tradition. We're going to go do it according to our tradition. The historians can say that the Mishnah didn't really appear until later and was a product of this influence and that influence and that influence. Even if I say all that's correct, which, by the way, parentheses, I probably would, right? I don't know if Mordecai would, but I would. What I would say then is by using the interpretive methods of the oral Torah, right? That explains the phenomenon of different time periods, different Jewish communities with different realities explaining the Torah differently. They are all using the exact same system of dealing with the text. And that doesn't mean that, right, in the traditional view, that wouldn't mean that one is invented. It means that things are discovered, right? Unearthed, right? There are layers peeled back, and then we have new understandings, right? And all of this rests on the notion that it all came from God on Sinai.
There you go.
Right?
I got
All
you.
of it rests on that
I
notion.
know, I
So
know, I know, I know. You're right. And everything you said, I acquiesce to it, right? Because again, I'm not here to destroy tradition. Like I said, I read the Mishnah myself. Now, the Gemara, that's a little different conversation. But the Mishnah I do because, again, it's a time capsule into history with the Big Din and the different cases that was going on at that time, and then using a system to rule on those matters, etc. So I don't have an issue with the Mishnah. Now, there's internal inconsistencies there. There are things that just don't work correctly, and that's another conversation. But I don't think it's egregious to anybody's faith, right? The issue I have is when we have individuals that say that in order for you to be a Jew, you have to adhere to, and then from there we get the Peg Torah, we get the Torah by mouth, the oral tradition. You have to do this as a prerequisite in order to be a Jew because you have to accept
where
it
does it say that?
holistically. No, no,
Bring a
no.
source.
No, the source are the Jews that I speak to. That's why I said, let me speak to Jews that do say that, Abba, and you can see. You'll be more objective. And
No,
I
but nobody says
appreciate
that.
that.
Yeah, but nobody says
Okay.
that.
All right.
Anybody who tells you that, anybody who tells you that is saying something else, right?
Okay, got it. Hmm.
Right? There is no such thing. I don't want to speak for Mordecai, but I think Mordecai would say simply Jews who don't observe the Torah are simply Jews that don't observe the Torah. They're not Jews,
Let's let Mordecai represent himself. Let's give him an
right?
opportunity.
I assume he would say something
No,
similar to
yes.
that.
And what I'm saying is that's why I said observant. That's what I'm saying. I'm not talking about those who are secularists and they're just Jew by ethnicity. I'm talking about observant, practicing Jews, right? That's what I'm saying. And when I asked you what is the prerequisite of it, you admitted that it is accepting holistically both the written and oral Torah, right? And that's what I'm saying. That is what I have an issue with when that is imposed on the
But that's not
definition
about
of what a Jew
observance.
is.
But that's not
Okay.
about observance.
It's not?
No,
Oh, okay. So what is it
it's
about
about
then?
it's about authority.
There we go. And that's when that again, that works right into the same thing that I was saying earlier. And when you challenge that first principle, then it becomes problematic because that's how it receives its authority, so that one can say, this is why if you're an observant Jew, practicing Jew, you need to accept this, which we're saying is the oral Torah.
No.
Okay.
I think no. It's not about the individual Jew accepting it, right? The system accepts it. The system accepts
What's
it.
the
And if
system
you are
so that we
trying,
know what you mean when you say system?
the system of Jewish law, of Talmud, of Jewish learning, right? The system assumes, all of the rabbinic system assumes rabbinic authority. And and not only assumes, it derives that, it infers that from various different verses in the Torah, right? So as far as it's concerned, the authority of the rabbis is given by the Torah, which is to say, given by God. Who are we to take away the authority of the rabbis? Now you can question, for what purpose was that? Is that cynical? Is that to kind of raise the rabbis above? We could talk about that, I'm not interested in that bit, right? Because I think that diverts. I think that diverts. According to the tradition itself, rabbis have authority. If you don't think that the Torah gives rabbis authority, that's fine. The reason that you don't think that is because you don't have the rabbinic tradition of how to read the Torah. We have that tradition.
Well,
You don't
not
have that
that.
tradition.
It's just to show again providence. For example, you're using a term that's anachronistic to the text itself that we
What's
can
that?
analyze and evaluate. The term
What's
rabbi.
that word?
The term rabbi.
So
Rabbi
again,
is
I
a
want you
first
to be
century.
careful. I want you to be
No. Listen.
careful with,
Abba,
Okay, go
again,
ahead.
let him
you
get a
got to be,
word in edgewise. Wait.
no. I hear you. I hear you. We're doing good. We're doing great.
All
We're
right,
doing
but
great.
I'm asking you to just let him
I hear
finish
you.
that statement.
I hear
He
you.
might know where he's going. The audience has no
I
idea
hear
what
you.
point he's about to make. Just let him say it.
I hear you. I hear you. And again, I want you to be careful a little bit
Are you
with
listening to me?
history.
I'm asking you to let him say it.
So hold on, Abba.
Like, wait.
So you can answer yes or no, and then please expound. Right. So is the term rabbi, is that an anachronistic term as it pertains to the Tanakh or the written Torah? If you say Rab Moses or if you say Rabbi Moshe, is that an anachronistic term? Yes or no? I'm just see this chronological markers
The
that we
ways
can utilize.
okay, so the
Mhm.
names, the different Jewish communal leaders have been called by different names in Jewish historical time periods. However, the the role that they played, particularly the ones that we're talking about as interpreters of the text and as judges of the law, regardless of whether people were called different names, that leadership position was consistent, right? So if they were called judge in the Bible, right, when Yitro says set up judges, right, Moses does, those judges, right, those leaders of the tribes, they have interpretive authority in the ways that rabbis do today, right? So don't get hung up on the fact that it's a different name. We should say, did they serve the same function? And the answer is yes.
Okay, I got you. So I'll succeed to that, but there's a reason why I said what I'm saying, and what I'm doing is trying to give people chronological markers, right? So as we continue the conversation, I'm going to demonstrate chronological markers, so that way I can prove that the tradition does not go back past the Chemia. And that's one of the things that I want to demonstrate. Now, again, for me personally, if Jews acquiesce to that, I wouldn't care. That's fine. Yeah, it goes back to Nehemiah. If that's what the scholarship shows, and we can look at it internally and see that that's what it is, that's fine. But as Jews, our tradition has to be predicated on belief. You said no, it has nothing to do with belief. It has to be predicated on the belief that this goes back to Rabbi Moshe. It is predicated on that. You can't have the system without that first principle that you just mentioned. It doesn't
It's
work
not
without it.
predicated on that. It's not
I
Okay,
don't think
predicated on
that's. I don't think
let me.
that's. Yeah, but it's
But
not. But
that's
it's
what you
not.
said, Abba.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But okay, so let me try to add a thing here that
Okay.
maybe will clear something up. Okay, when you're talking about belonging to the nation of Jews, I think that's one question. When you're talking about the spiritual system of the Jewish nation, that's a separate question. Okay, and I think you're joining these things together in a way that I think is
No,
unhelpful
no, I'm not even dealing with
and
ethnicity.
confusing. Right, right,
I'm
right.
not
So
dealing with
listen.
ethnicity.
So I'm not dealing with ethnicity also either. I'm dealing with national citizenship, which is not ethnic. Okay. What I'm talking about is if somebody who converts or somebody who is born Jewish, right? They don't have to believe in the doctrine of oral Torah and written Torah as having the authority coming from Moses. They don't have to believe that.
But they have to
However,
subjugate themselves to it, though,
wait,
regardless.
wait, 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 wait. However, the system itself believes that and holds that to be an axiom. And so anytime you're operating in the system, you have to hold that as an assumption. That's it.
Correct. Correct. Or you don't have anything else. I mean, that's
Well,
again, that's what
again
we
and
said. That's the
again,
axiom.
right,
so,
but it's
so
not the axiom for individual Jews. And even if I were to
no, the
reject
system
that,
you're saying, the system, I got you.
the
I got you.
system, the
The
system,
system.
the
And what
system,
I'm
the
saying is
system.
because of that, it is faulty. And that's what I'm saying. If we just
Why is it
remove that out,
faulty?
hold on, because it can't be proven. If we can remove that out of the
You
system,
don't prove axioms.
oh, you keep saying this. Okay, so I'm gonna send you. I'm gonna post a nice little book in the chat because I know you like to read. You're a bibliophile, and you can read it for yourself, right? On how axioms are challenged, right? Especially if they're presupposed with really no backing. I mean, you have to believe it as self-evident. I think that's what Jews do. They believe it's a self-evident fact that the oral Torah goes all the way back to Moshe, right? It's a self-evident fact, correct?
It,
Yes.
it, you don't prove self-evident facts.
That's what I'm saying. That's my
That's
point.
right.
So
That's
I
right.
so
So that's
so
but
so
that's
wait,
all we
wait.
have, right?
I got you. Yeah, you're right. That's all you have. So I'm saying outside of those measures, if you are to demonstrate to somebody that, hey, look, I know you have it as a self-evident truth, and that's fine. I'm not imposing on your spatial sacred space. I'm not dealing with that. What I'm simply saying is if we can say that the Jews created this system, right, as a means of formalizing instructions on how to receive Torah, how to apply Torah, when does Torah apply, when does it need to be flexible, and this came about as a post-exilic construct, I have no problems with that. But the
Okay.
problem is the system cannot accept that because if it does, it removes the
No,
authoritative
no, no,
element.
no,
Okay.
no,
All right,
no.
gotcha.
This is it's just wildly uninf and I don't mean this is not an I do
Oh
not
no, I
mean this
got
to be
tough skin. You can say
offensive
whatever you
and
want, my
insulting.
brother.
I do not mean that this way, okay? But it's you have a lot of missing you have a lot of uninformation about how this system actually works, and you're just kind of honing in on this kind of one idea, but it really undoes exactly what the whole tradition is all about. Okay, so again, it's not a religion like that, right? Where it's like you believe and then you're cool. That's not how this works, right? You study and then you learn and then you do mitzvot and you study more and you learn more and you do mitzvot and you study more and you learn more and you do mitzvot. And who are you studying with? Hopefully a partner, ideally with a rabbi and in a community of practice so that your learning in yeshiva and wherever else you're doing the learning can be properly applied actually in your real life, right? So all I'm saying when the two of us are on equal footing in this regard, right? I'm not going to give up that the oral Torah was given on Sinai, and you're not going to give up that that's a specious way to give authority. Conversation over.
No problem.
Unless I want to suspend my commitments to oral Torah and then step into your world and understand how you do the text, or you're going to do the same in reverse. If neither of those things are going to happen, then all we're going to do is you're going to say, I don't accept that premise, that authority, and I'm going to say, no problem, you don't have to. Thank you very
No,
much.
so what I'm saying, and again, you're making it seem like we're both uninformed of each other's positions, and that's not the case. What I'm saying is I understand the system. And that's why, based on what we're saying, it's predicated upon that presupposition. Without it, the system falls apart. It's like pulling a
Right,
loose
and
thread.
and you have a
Hold on.
presupposition too, right, Devon? What's
Wait.
your Wait, you have a similar
Abba,
presupposition, right?
hold on. We all do.
Let him finish.
Right. So
Listen,
there
we
you
all,
go. We all do.
Hold on. Let him.
yes, but slow down 1 second. Hold on. We all have presuppositions. I agree. We all do. That system is predicated on it. Millions of systems that exist today are predicated upon presuppositions and axioms. Some of them just restricted to self-evident truths. What I'm saying is, and now in 2023, people have the means, the methodology, and the tools and sources to go back and say, hey, let me evaluate that premise that I thought this idea that I held true to stand on, because here's a very practical reason, because people are challenging it. So I need to step outside of, like you said, put to the curb what I accept to be self-evidently true for a second, to just try to step out of that and say, okay, why are you saying that my particular tradition starts at Ezra and Nehemiah? Why are you saying that? Like, what would give you that notion? Because in my system, right, we have a series of checks and balances, and our authority based on tradition, right, based on genealogical records that people have shared with me before, it goes all the way back to Joshua, all the way
Okay,
back to
so
Moshe.
Divine, let me ask you a question. Two versions of the same question. Okay.
Hey, Divine,
What
respectfully,
is
Divine, did you make your point, or are you just being
Joel.
a
I made
gentleman?
my point. So I want to hear his
Okay.
questions based on that point.
Okay.
yeah. Divine, we're cool,
No,
right?
it's good. It's good. Yeah, go ahead.
We're doing
Yeah, go
okay,
ahead.
right? We're doing
Mm-hmm.
okay, yeah? Okay, great. I want to make sure I'm a good guest. Honestly, truthfully. Okay. Um, two versions of the same question. What is motivating you, or the not you, but what is behind the motivation of saying, questioning this, where where one group thinks they get the authority and where not? Okay, that's sort of one version of the question. The second version of the question is, why should rabbinic Jewish communities engage in that kind of questioning our first premises?
So for the second question, I answer that first. They don't have to. So that is not the audience in who I'm really speaking to. The audience I'm speaking to, based on the first question you asked, or first inquiry you presented or proposed, is that they say that it is binding. So, in the previous room, a good friend of mine, his name is Yosef, he came on the stage and he spoke. I was just at the brother's house 2 weeks ago, right? That's somebody that I know personally, right, for years, right? Me and him have two different positions on this. One position is that if Jews are observant and they're practicing Judaism, then they are expected to accept the authority of the rabbis, right? In regards to how the system of interpretation works, parties, he mentioned that earlier, you have to be initiated to get all the way to the level. And number two, the presupposition that this authority goes back to Moses, hence why he brought out all the scriptures in Torah, the written Torah, in regards to instruction, and in regards to this, in regards to setting up these judges, because the system is predicated on that. If somebody says, hey, I'm a Jew outside of the oral tradition because it cannot be shown to go back to Moshe. Therefore, you don't have the authority to make it authoritative. Why is it binding if one of
Okay,
the
okay, great.
what? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. No, no, no. That's super helpful. Now I think I got a piece of information that I didn't have before. That's great. Um, Somebody can be a Jew, right, and reject the authority of the rabbis and decide for themselves, right? I'm going to reject that system, right, and practice, just for lack of a better, more elegant term, only what the Torah says. Okay? Now, that person remains a Jew. They don't give up. They don't give up their Jew card just because they've rejected the authority of the rabbis, right? See Karaites for an example, some different Karaite groups, right? But the inverse is not true. The inverse is not true, and right? You cannot say, well, I reject the authority of the rabbis, which is a nonsensical question if you're not Jewish anyway, right? Right? So if you're not a convert and you're not a Jewish person, right, born to Jewish mothers, it's not even a question of you whether you accept the authority of the rabbis or not. It's a question for Jews. So to say, I reject the authority of the rabbis on their interpretation of Torah, and I'm just going to take the Torah itself, and therefore I'm being, I don't even know what the word is, and I don't want to get into that. But if you're trying to, if somebody is trying to say that that then is more authentic, feel free to say that. But the fact that you rejected the rabbis as a person who's not subject to the system anyway, the system doesn't consider you, the system only considers Jews subject to the system. So it
Yeah,
doesn't mean anything.
Jews who accept those premises that you just laid
No,
forth.
no,
Okay.
sir. No, sir. I have two Jewish parents. Okay. If I decided to have not grown up if I didn't grow up in a religious house and didn't decide to become a rabbi and commit my life to teaching Torah, right? And I decided none of this is valuable. I don't want anything to do with this. The system itself, Jewish law system, still thinks I'm obligated. It still thinks
Obligated to do what?
obligated to observe the commandments.
Concluding what? Can you be more expressive with that?
No, there
What is
is
that
no
inclusive of?
concluding what. There is
No,
no
inclusive
concluding
of what?
what.
You just said
Inclusive of performing the commandments.
what when you mean commandments, you mean
I mean,
what?
observing Shabbat, observing the dietary laws,
Oh,
giving
those elements.
tzedakah,
Tzedakah. Okay.
the laws.
Charity.
Okay,
Okay.
the system itself. Even though I have decided to not consider myself subject to it,
Mm-hmm.
the system still thinks I am. And so, according to the system, right, what I do or don't do, right, either means I fulfilled the law or I didn't fulfill the law. But the law still thinks I'm subject to it. Just like in America, if I decide taxes are illegal or unconstitutional and I decide not to pay my taxes, I can't then go in front of the IRS and say, well, I'm sorry. I reject your entire system entirely and you can't arrest me or punish me for not paying my taxes because I don't consider myself subject to the system. You get laughed out the door. Same thing here.
Yeah. So the
The
You say
difference.
that to
Hold
say
on.
what? You know what I'm trying to
What I
say?
was going to say, yeah, what I'm going to say is the difference is that's a civil matter, right? So a civil matter.
Do you know how many civil laws are included in
Hold
Jewish
on,
law?
hold on. Yes, but let me just. I understand. I understand the point you were making, and the analogy you gave. But what I'm saying is that's a civil matter. We're dealing with a religious matter, right? And here on this soil, if you're a citizen of this nation, that supersedes anything that anybody wants to proclaim to be religious. Because, like you said, I could say for religious reasons, I don't support taxes, but yet I have a national ID card that doesn't work that way, right?
It's
So,
not
so
that's not the symmetry in my analogy.
okay. So, but what I'm saying is, I'm speaking about a religious matter, and we're talking about that religious system that has a foundation based on what I'm saying is false pretenses. Not that the system itself means to mislead anybody. I don't generally think that that's the intention. No, what I'm saying is, if that is challenged, it would be outrightly dismissed because the system cannot exist without those first premises being the foundation.
The religious matters include civil matters.
It's holistic. I
The
agree.
the entire system, right, of the 613 commandments and the codifying of the Jewish law is to say something like there are no areas of life and living that Torah doesn't touch. There
But
aren't
it doesn't
any,
have authority
right?
in
And
those
that's
areas because here, no,
no
no,
no
no,
no no
no,
no
no,
no no
no,
no
and
no
no,
no.
it does not because you cannot go to a country and say I'm a Torah observant Jew, and this is how I live my life civilly. So I don't care what laws you have on the books.
Ah, very interesting. Because you know why? You know, we have an answer for that in Judaism, right? And we've developed this answer partially in virtue of the fact that we've lived in so many foreign countries without our own sovereignty. What we say is Dina de Malchuta Dina. The law of the land is the law, which means that unless it's in some kind of like real conflict about how we are supposed to observe, we observe the laws of the land. We don't go to other countries and say, sorry, I don't have to observe your thing because of my religious stricture. Nope, we don't say that. We actually say the opposite. Your laws are
Correct.
the laws because right? We say the now that's not an abrogation of the Torah.
No. Oh, my bad.
Divine,
I
are
was
you
on
there?
mute. What I'm saying,
Yeah, yeah.
what I'm saying is, I want to get back onto my premise of authority. You made it clear that as an observant Jew, right, who is in the system and adheres to what the system dictates or obligates the adherent to do, right? Everything that I'm saying is nonsensical, is is have no value, right? Because the system is going to be the system, the traditions are the traditions, and that's the way it is. No problem.
That's the
If,
way it is. Yep.
gotcha.
That's the way it is.
But to address your first question, you asked me, why? Why am I making this inquiry into it? So your assumption now is that I don't identify as a Jew. Is that your assumption? Because it sounds like that's
I'm
where you're
not
getting at.
I don't know. I'm
Okay,
not
gotcha.
assuming anything. If you want to share that information, that's fine, but I'm not
No
assuming anything.
problem. No problem. Okay, gotcha. So I'm gonna put that aside. No problem. So I'm gonna assume you're just speaking generally, and I think that's fine. So what I'm saying is the issue that I have is the imposition of those obligations. You remember those obligations you mentioned earlier? Like the system has obligations, like you are obliged to do A, B, and C according to the system, right? That's what you mentioned earlier. That is the issue that I have because some of those obligations are predicated on something that cannot be proven based on its initial premise, which is that the authority for the system to say you are obligated goes all the way back in an unbroken chain that goes back to Moshe and Mount Sinai. So
Yeah, I
that's
get it.
that.
I
I
get
got
it.
you.
I get it. You're simply questioning the justification for the authority of the oral tradition. I
And
totally
that's the
get it.
only issue I have.
In other words,
Not it itself.
I totally get it.
Okay.
No, I totally get it. And you know, it would be like saying, I reject the authority of the Supreme Court. I only adhere to the authority of the Constitution. That's a similar thing to what you'd be saying. And that's fine if you want to
Well,
say that.
kind of, but
That's totally
you know, the
fine.
judges can overthrow legislative ordinances.
Yeah,
So you could reject
the
it.
judges can't change the Constitution. That's the
No, they
point.
can't. But the Constitution gives them their power to overthrow legislative ordinances.
Exactly
Okay,
right. Just like the Torah gives
and
authority to the rabbis. Just that
no.
same thing. They're the same thing. Exactly the
Do,
same
do,
thing.
And
do.
that's why I asked you
It's
about that term,
exactly the same.
rabbi.
You get it.
So
Oh,
watch,
you
y'all.
totally
Watch.
get it. You
No,
get
of course
it.
but listen. Sometimes I have to play ignorant and say things that seem ignorant because these are the thought streams or the egregores that enter and creep into these conversations. So I have to represent a multitude of other inquiries outside of my own and pose it to you for the listeners because they may not have the opportunity to speak to a rabbi of 10 years and ask these questions. Trust me, I totally get it. Matter of fact, once I stop talking and I yield, which I would love to do, is I don't want to take up the room. I'm going to put a link in the chat, and you're going to see a litany of books, right? That I recommend people to read. A lot of them are actually written by rabbis themselves, but they're writing objectively. You see, that's what I like. They're writing objectively. They're a bit into certain things, which is how you do honest scholarship on anything you believe, anything you subscribe to, or anything that you take seriously. And I think that people should question these things. They don't have to, but I think they
When
should.
I want to describe
Mhm.
the constitutional system,
Wait, wait.
or I want to
Let
describe
him,
any
let him,
legal
let
system.
him finish his sentence like at to a period before you get right back. Just let him. He was going somewhere with that. What was the thing you were trying to close with,
Yeah. So
Divine?
what I'm saying is, man, I just forgot what I said. That's crazy.
Yeah, you
I
know.
Um,
apologize.
no,
You're
you
right. I
good. So
It's
what
all
was
interrupted.
the
right.
last
It's all
thing I
right.
said, Yoel? Does somebody remember the last point I make? And I'll just probably just jump into it from there.
You were saying sometimes you say nonsensical things because that's the nature of the conversation, but it's
I
the bring
said that.
it's the labor of point, and then you
Oh,
were
I know what I'm
going about
saying. Yeah. So what I'm saying was, those people who subscribe to as Jews should not, in any way, shape, or form, have any fear, right, of being outcast by the system or maybe challenging their own self-evident truths as being a Jew. And I'm talking about outside of the ethnic portion of it. I'm talking about those who are observant, those who are adherent to Judaism, by questioning the origin of things, right? The provenance of things. You learn a lot about the tradition that way, right? And how the Jews adapted to different circumstances, which you also mentioned earlier. But what I'm saying is, with that comes this situation of cognitive dissonance, where if you're presented with something that says otherwise, do you just hold back blindly to the tradition because you're part of the system and that's the way it works? Or do you say, hey, let's introduce this to see if it has some value? And if so, how can it edify us? How can it encourage us as a community? How can it, I'm trying to find the best way to live. How can it modify the system so that way we could be a bit more flexible and be able to evolve past where we're currently at? Because every system has flaws. There's no perfect system because they're made by imperfect people. So every system has flaws. It's a process that we should put things through in order for us to fine tune it and allow different generations
Yeah,
to come out. And we see that by the sages and rabbis on giving
yeah,
commentary. Matter of fact, Rashi does a
that's
lot of
right.
this, giving his commentary in the Talmud. But anyway, that's neither here nor there, right?
Well, but that's
So
exactly right. Right. In other words, that's exactly right. In other words, to make it relevant and to give that elasticity, to be able to apply it in all of those different circumstances, you need to be able to extend past the written words of the laws in the Torah. You have to be able to, because those are written in a specific time for a specific people in a specific time and place that is also eternal, according to its own words. How can it be eternal if I'm not living in the land of Israel? How can it be
that,
eternal if I'm not right? In other words, so all of these things, and again,
mhm.
I think we just descend into this thing. You don't think that it's a reasonable way to give authority to the rabbis. That's totally fine. But if you follow that to its logical conclusion, right, I think you'd also have to, just for sort of consistency's sake, right? And maybe it's different because it's not God given and whatever you can fetch about that.
No, go ahead. Mhm.
But again, I think the constitutional system is very apt. The Supreme Court judges don't make up words that are in the Constitution. They interpret the words in the Constitution. They are
Correct.
not authorized to, right? They're not authorized to change the words, but they are authorized by the very document that they are interpreting to
That's what the
interpret.
Gemara is.
Same with the Torah. Same with the Torah, right? The
Yeah.
Torah gives authority to the rabbis to interpret itself,
Okay. Gotcha. So
right?
what I'm saying is, hold on. So what I'm saying
So
is,
it's the exact same thing. Now you can say that that's not a reasonable way to give authority,
no, no, no.
but
So
we have examples. But we have all kinds of examples where the central texts of the systems give the authority to the workers of the system. That's not unusual, and
no, it's
that's not
not.
unreasonable.
But what I'm saying is, what we have currently today is not connected to that. That's what I'm saying. It comes
Why do
from
you
a
think that?
different, and
Well, the
that's
New
what I want to
Testament
present.
also would be held under
But
that same
nobody's
scrutiny.
nobody's
Wait,
talking
but
about the
why do
New
you
Hold on,
why do
hold
you
on,
Testament.
think?
hold
But
on,
That
why do
Bring
you
up the New
think
because
that
that's
we
hold
Testament.
on,
don't?
hypocritical
hold
to
on. Let
say
Right,
me do
that
this.
divine.
that
Why
Let
do
me
you
gives
hold
think
on,
that?
authority, but
hold
not
on,
the
hold on.
rabbis.
Let me hold on. Let me do this now. I'm trying to make social rooms so everybody can feel comfortable. It's a little different vibe than your normal room. But when you come to the stage, don't just unmute. Allow the conversation that's currently happening to happen. That's why the people are here for this current conversation. If you want to join that conversation, you have to wait until it's your time to speak and be spoken to. Let them discuss what they're discussing. It's linear and it's educational. Just wait. We're going to get to you. Who was speaking last? Was it Abba?
I just want to
It
know
was
divine.
Yehuda, and he was
Yeah,
talking about the New Testament. I'm
we
confused.
don't have
Yeah,
to
no,
go to the New Testament at all.
don't acknowledge that. You guys have your own conversation. He
Yeah,
could talk
yeah.
about that on his time.
Go ahead, Abba.
Divine, you said something like today we don't have that same kind of connection to the system or something like. How do you? What gives you that idea? How do you know
So,
that?
and again, this goes back to what we was talking about as far as axioms. So the question is, what was happening in the written Torah, which would go back to the Iron Age period, right? Archaeologically speaking. But when you use tradition, it goes back further to Moshe, which is the late Bronze Age period, right? The situation in regards to the things that they were facing in regards to the environment, etc., right? There are certain things, again, in written Torah that was based on things that was predicated on the theocracy that was established in Canaan, right? And that particular region tied to that territory, which has geographical features, right? That has topography, etc., right? That has a particular fauna and flora, etc., that exists in that environment. Yes, you would agree, correct?
Yeah, I don't know why that matters, but
Okay,
sure.
so no, it matters a lot. So therefore, how can you take what the written Torah is saying and be able to apply it in 2023? Well, you just said
Oh,
what you
that's
use. It's
easy.
called
That's easy.
principles.
Oh, I'll tell you.
Hold on. No, no. You said it. It's called principles, axioms, or halacha. So wait,
Yeah.
slow down for one. Okay, slow down for 1 second. So let's say, for example, right, let's matter of fact, let's say this, right. So taking a look at the Talmud, right, being completed or closed out in about the 6th century CE, right, in Babli, right, or Babylon, and that's the source of that Gemara of the Talmud, right, not the Yerushalayim version, right. Those individuals were in a particular region, in a particular locale that was not the land of Israel, or that was previously known as, correct?
Okay.
Okay. So a lot of things that they gave commentary on was also based on their immediate environment and things that they're doing in exile, things that they
Right.
have to. Okay. So what I'm saying is now, what if there's another group of Jews that are exiled somewhere outside of Israel and Babylon, somewhere completely different, and they never had any encounter with what we call the oral Torah in its written form, and they have a form of halakha that differs from those in that region of Babylon and that region previously known as Israel. That is not
Mm-hmm.
going to be recognized as authoritative, what they develop based on the axioms that they extract from the written Torah to apply to their immediate environment and create a halakha out of that. That's not going to be considered as authoritative. Somebody would say, no, they shouldn't do that. They have to go by this lineage of rabbis and subscribe to what's written here and how the sages interpreted here. That becomes problematic. And we see that, especially in Mikhak and customs that certain people gather or they accumulate, which is a direct byproduct of their halakha.
Here's
And
how I would
sometimes,
say it.
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I
Mhm.
think that's great. Okay, so I'm not going to deny that other people around the world have Torah, right? And didn't have the same, you know, participation in the evolution into the rabbinic tradition. Sure. Um, what I would expect, however, in those communities is that there would be a there would be a kind of an oral law which would look like the minhagim, the practices, the particular ways that given that environment, that social context, that those people in adherence to Torah would have understood the Torah. In other words, even those people are not just reading the verses literally and then doing what they say. In other words, I'll give you a great example of that. I, I will be shocked if anybody here who has the Torah in authority thinks that they should stone their rebellious son outside of the city gates directly by the parents. And if you don't think that that's what you should be doing, then you also have a separate authority alongside the written words of the Torah. Okay? So let's be consistent. If it's the only place of authority, okay, then we have to look at how that thing gets lived out and what gives the people who are making it a workable system, what gives them, right? How do they do it? And we can ask, those are just factual questions. How does that society run? When we ask questions, those same questions about how the Jewish community has operated, Well, we get the kinds of answers that I've been giving, right? But again, all you're saying is you don't accept that that's an acceptable way to give somebody authority.
No, no,
That's
no, no.
okay.
I'm
That's fine.
saying that that
Fine.
method and that environment at that time should not be authoritatively imposed on those who have developed halacha outside
Nobody's
of the
imposing it on
hold on.
someone else.
Wait, hold on. Outside of those auspices. So
No one's
this is the
imposing.
all right, got it. So that means that you are in agreement that those who develop an independent halacha that's based off the written Torah, that is situated in the immediate environment and context in which they live. So one of the things you mentioned earlier is the laws of the land, right? You had mentioned that earlier. So how you apply it is based on the region in which you live, especially if Jews are not the ones that are sovereign in that land, which is very rare that we see anything like that, right? Except for today. But anyway, so the point I'm saying is if they're in a distant land and they have to look at written Torah and say, okay, how do we apply this in exile? See, that is a whole nother topic. And that is what was handled by those sages in Babylon. I understand that. However, that is not the only immediate context in
Great.
which Jews live.
Using the rules of the oral tradition.
And the rules are not the same rules if you ask another distant Jew who's using halakha based on the written Torah that he has received or has known orally, right? And he's applying. He's probably not going to use the
Yeah.
same
Look.
rules if he's not
Okay.
exposed to it. And a good
I
example
got
of
you.
that, and correct me if I'm wrong, right, is the Beta Israel. When the Beta Israel was discovered, did they adhere to the same rules and oral tradition that was being practiced in the land of Israel?
Okay. So now I understand something else. Okay.
Okay.
Good. You keep
Mm-hmm.
adding information for me. This is good. It's helping me be in the conversation. Nobody's pushing rabbinic Judaism, I hope, on other kinds of Jewish communities that didn't develop alongside that tradition, right? Every Torah based diaspora has some kind of oral tradition. It's like I don't know how you would not, right? Um, but for at least a couple thousand years, and I would maintain even longer, all the way back to Sinai, right? The majority, the mainstream, the recognized Jewish communities have done it this way, right? In this system. It doesn't mean the outcomes were always the same. It doesn't mean that the halachic decisions were always the same. But the process has been maintained, and that I think is what's going on, is what we're sort of debating back and forth. So if somebody who had a different tradition, right, that developed alongside rabbinic oral tradition, and let's say they wanted to join, let's say, my synagogue, okay, um, I wouldn't ask them any questions about belief, right? I wouldn't say, hey, do you trust the authority of the rabbis? No. I would say, hey, welcome to shul, right? Where are you from? My name's Rabbi Allen. What's your name? We'd have a conversation, right? And I'd get to know that person and a little bit of their story. And based on some of those conversations, right, I as the rabbi, as the authority in that community, right, to draw and create the boundaries within the context of halacha and the ways that I see it, right, and the ways that my teachers have seen it and their teachers and they taught it to me, right. So then I can make a decision if I think that person is Jewish or not Jewish, right. And I can think about their lineage and I can think about conversion or not conversion and continuity with the Torah tradition or not, right? We can have all of that, and we have all of those conversations in rabbinic legal works contemporarily, right? For a long time we've had these things. So if the interest is those Jews who say they have an oral tradition are saying they're the only kind of real Jews, but there's other kinds of real Jews, if that's what we're after, let me just say, sure, I think there are other people in the world who are Jews who the system itself, my system of rabbinic Torah, thinks they are obligated in, even though they don't think they're obligated in it. That's fine. I have no problem conceding that. If they
Gotcha.
want to be part of Jewish community, that requires, in some level, be understanding that the system we run is the rabbinic system. If you don't want that, that's
No,
fine.
and I
But
understand.
that's what we run.
And that's why I said that you're probably the wrong person for me to have this conversation with. And I would love to invite other rabbis who I have spoken to in person, dealt in academic circles, and even engaged here on Clubhouse to be here. And you will see the conservative, ultra conservative position that they have, which is not as flexible as yours. And you will see that. So I hope one of them joins. I pinged two of them, and you will see that you are more objective, and I can talk and be more flexible in the conversation with you than those who are ultra conservative. And they are rabbis, and they are certified board rabbis of rabbinates. So what I'm saying is, I just want you to witness that type of discussion, and you will probably jump in and say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa," because the things that you're saying, you're like, "Okay, you don't have to. Okay, that's fine. Okay." That's not the case with them, right? And they're shaming me because I don't feel obliged, if I identify as a Jew, to want to submit to that system, and that's what I'm saying. And it's not just because, oh, I want to challenge a rabbi. It's because I can show proof outside of that system, right? If the system wants to actually even care to
Right.
see that there's, so for this, let me end off with this, right? In regards to you, Abba, let's want to move on to Mordecai real quick, because I don't want to hog up the stage, and I can't stay long either. But what I want to say to you is this, right? You're not the right person for this conversation for me. You are the right and wrong person. You're the right person because you can see it objectively outside the system, right? And you're fair, right? However, what I was really trying to address, and I'm glad we had a conversation because I know that you're not the right person I was aiming this towards, are those who have to hinge everything. Why would you not accept this if it goes back to Rav Moshe? Why? Why? That's what I want you to see. That's who I want to kind of peel some layers back and have them take a look at some things underneath and showcase the reason why, right? And it's not to undermine their tradition. That's fine. It's just to show them that why doesn't the tradition want to accept this and still be a tradition? It's
Right.
not gonna take away anything. So
Right.
let me just get this for the audience. So when I was talking about halacha, and again, that's how halacha is how you walk. Like halacha is how you walk a principle out that you've discovered. So that way it's applicable in your practical everyday life. And any Jew that is beholding to the written Torah in any place in the world, you're right. They're gonna have oral instructions. They're gonna have the halakha. Sometimes they may even write it down. We have halakha that's written down. But what I'm saying is their system is going to be independent in its creation and formation outside of the rabbinic lineage that exists today. And I'm saying that there's those from the rabbinic lineage that say, no, that is not authentic.
Yeah.
No, that's mhm.
Right. I want to caution you to not have the conversations with the other folks that you want and continue to have a conversation with people like me. And the reason is because I don't know if this is what you mean, right? But sounds a little bit like you need a fundamentalist to argue with so that you can sort of land X point, right? And I'm not not giving you that much space because I'm not giving
No,
you
I
that
don't
much
think
space
you're
to do
not
that, right?
reformed, right? You're not reformed, right?
I'm a conservative rabbi.
Okay, so you're not reformed. Okay, go ahead.
Okay,
So I mean, so
so
you're sort of a fundamentalist then.
no,
No? Oh, okay.
no, no.
Cool.
Conservative with a big C, the conservative movement of Judaism that exists in America, right? Not
Yeah,
small c conservative.
I don't follow the difference between a reformed and a conservative. Can you explain that?
That could take a while, but I think the basic what I think we need for this conversation is that the reform movement does not see itself as subject to the system of Jewish law, and the conservative movement does.
Yes,
I
and the
think
reformed is a
that's
little bit more flexible, and that's why I asked
I think
if
that's important. That's enough that we need
yeah,
for
as an
this.
oversimplification
Yeah,
for now. But I'm just saying that
for
because
sure.
I see a degree of flexibility in what you're saying, and you're not really staunch in your position. it leads me to believe that you probably err more on the liberal side of conservatism, right? Because you're not imposing or not binding people to these things if they want to be a Jew,
Well,
identify as a
no, no,
Jew.
no, 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 no. But let's again. I want to say this very clearly. People can decide what they want to do anytime, right? I don't have police power, right, to enforce people observing the law. But I do still believe that the law thinks that all Jews are subject to it. Those are two separate things. People can choose whatever they like. The system considers you still obligated, right? So for you,
Are you
Divine,
part of
if
the
you,
system, Abba?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
got it. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, the system considers me obligated too. In other words, if I decide tomorrow that I'm not going to be observe any commandments ever again, right? The system doesn't kick me out. The system says you're a sinner and you're obligated for those
There we
sins,
go. Okay, gotcha,
right?
gotcha.
Okay, so again, don't confuse the fact that somebody who's Jewish can reject it all with them being able, as far as the system is concerned, to choose different bodies of authority. This is all about authority at the end of the day, right? That's where we're
Correct.
at.
That's the that and
That's it. So that's it.
you're right. You're right. So what I want to do, I want to give the audience. This is a book that I have in my hand from Rutledge Focus Publishing, called Eldad's Travels, and I know you're familiar with Eldad Khatani. Journey from the Lost Tribes to the Present, and this is a case study on Eldad Khatani, right? Who was a spectacle to the Babylonian Jews and the Reshivas and Knesses that existed at that time. And we're talking about the 9th century CE, and encountering this man, this colorful character that is talking expressively about the things he discovered beyond the rivers of Spation, that he found other Jews there, and they was examining the words and stuff that he was saying, discovered that he has a different method for sacrifice and deeming certain files clean and unclean, as opposed to the laws that existed at that time or the traditions that existed at that time. And you'll see this real life case study on how they dealt with this character, right? How that what he was saying was instrumental in the better Israel today being identified as authentic Jews that are practicing Torah, right? And again, outside of the rabbinic authority, outside the rabbinic premises and auspices of control, right? In regards, like you said, a system, in order to accept someone, if they're outside of the ordinances of the system, they're considered a sinner. They got to go through a process to come back into the fold, right? I got you. I understand that. But I want to deal with things where we can actually see these case studies. And this is just one of many. I'm just using this as an example because it plays into what I said earlier about Jews in a distant land who have no exposure to the things that we're talking about, to this rabbinic system, and yet develop their own halacha, and that was authoritative to them in the lands in which they live because they've expressed Torah there and they have a means of applying it there, and how that these individuals as a community was unknown, right? By rabbis prior to the 9th century CE, unknown that you had a whole community, that a whole system of their own aura tradition or oral Torah that is developed independently of their community, their Knesset, right? And that they are living in a state of tranquility, a state of peace, undisturbed, unbothered. This is why when they heard these fanciful tales from him, they had to really critically examine what it is he was saying and authenticate what he was saying. So this is why they were sending letters to this yeshiva and that yeshiva, because they had to figure out what's going on. How is this person going on talking about these communities that exist? They're in peace. So much so that the river stops on the Sabbath for them. It's like, what is these fanciful tales you talking about? There's Levites amongst them and everything. What? What are you talking about? So they had to deal with that. And this is a great case study on that. And this is why I'm a proponent that any Jews that are in distant lands that develop their own halacha based on the immediate context of their environment, that's predicated on axioms derived from the written Torah, that should be authoritative to that community, and no other community outside of that should bind them or impose authority on them because it works for them in the environment, in the context, social context, civil context, and legal context in which they live. And that is what I'm a proponent of. And that's why I say, Abba, yes, I do talk to Jews that are flexible and kind of can be objective like you. However, today, you're not the person I'm looking to talk to. That's all I'm saying, right? Because my brother Mordecai Good brother. He's a little bit flexible and objective as well. Matter of fact, some things he say, conservative Jews would be like, wait, what? You know what I'm saying? However, he does subscribe to that unbroken lineage, and he is a proponent that will defend that unbroken lineage because he mentioned it earlier, right, in the previous room. And that is all I'm challenging today. There's a million other things we can agree on or disagree on, but that is what I came here to serve today. That's all. So I appreciate your time and the conversation, Abba. And if
Thanks,
Mordecai has a
Divine.
few more minutes, anytime, follow me and I'll follow you back. If you have a few more minutes, Mordecai, I don't know if you're even still there. I'd like to have
Yeah,
a
yeah,
quick
yeah.
conversation with
Just,
you.
I'm
Okay,
just
cool,
taking it.
cool, cool.
I'm taking it in.
All right, so let me read this real quick. I just want to segue into a source because again, I have tons of them ready to share. I just been talking, and I wanted to attentively listen to what the rabbi was saying, so that's why I didn't share them yet. But I want to read a source for those who are interested in this discussion. Right, there's several, maybe about 5 good ones that I like to go to that people should research. Right. One of them is called The History of the Jews and Judaism in the Second Temple Period, Volume 1, right? And this is by Lester L. Grab, and it's from T&T Clark Publishing, okay? Another one that's really good is A Search for the Origins of Judaism, right? Very, very important book to read if you want to understand it at an academic level, not a traditional level from Judaism, but an academic level and studied objectively, right? Another one is called Household and Family Religion in Persian Period Judah, an archaeological approach. And one of the interesting things that these sciences do afford, even those who are traditionalist Jews, is that we have uncovered a litany of tablets that showcases how these Jews lived in a time period where they were not writing about this history. So, for example, the Al Yehudu tablets, where we have what people would call Israelite Jewish names, that we can tell from the morphology of how the words are written and what tributes were being given and what land grants were being given to them. And as a result of this, a result of that, a whole community was flourishing that prior knowledge was lost from, but now archaeology affords us to give it a voice. And we have that information. So we can see how Jews were living in Babylon. It's not a mystery anymore, right? We have certain information that is written in stone, so to say, that's been inscribed in stone in cuneiform tablets that now could be written, can be examined, can be accepted, right? And things that they thought was authoritative. We have the cuneiforms that we have from Elephantine Island and the Jews that lived in Egypt during that time period under Persian rule. And what they were doing day to day, the letters that they sent in exchange, the different contracts they had, land grants that was given to them, especially them being mercenaries, etc. There's a whole history there. And I'm saying I try to look at everything holistically and then formulate that into an aggregate construct that allows me then to say, okay, now I see how they were doing here, 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 and here. What's the common denominator? I deduce it down to that. And then I say, okay, now that I know the common denominator, I'm going to inductively work to create a system that is as flexible as all these different groups that we're studying, the things that they did, what worked and what didn't work based on the core principles that they had, and try to see if this can give us a more holistic approach of how to walk out, right? How to have a more fine-tuned and evolve in halacha that will allow us to evolve in 2023 and beyond in order for us to subscribe to the notions of our tradition and then allow it to branch out, grow, and flourish without the stipulations of, oh no, that's outside of this, or no, that's outside of that. That's my initial premise. So when I give you these resources, it allows you to study all of this history so that way you can also take it in historically. And again, you can reject whatever you don't want or say, okay, that was good read, but it doesn't really mean nothing. But at least you're exposed to it and you have an opportunity, whether or not that you want to accept it and find some way to integrate it into your current walk. Or if you want to dismiss it and say, okay, that was a good read, but I'm going to continue on with my tradition and just block everything else out. So I'm just being fair by sharing this and giving the audience this opportunity to do that, right? A last one is called Household, Sex, and the Origins of Rabbinic Judaism, right? And I know my ultra conservative counterparts who are Jews are going to just scoff at the fact that you're using academia to understand our culture, to understand us as Jews. I mean, this is sacrilegious what I'm doing right now. You shouldn't expose our community to that because the tradition says this and it stands this way. And that is the issue that I have. Now, again, I have a whole history on it, going to a synagogue and going to conversion, all that. I have a whole nother testimony that I can give in regards to my walk in that direction and why it led me to where I'm in now. But I don't want to share that now. I just want people to look and see for themselves, where did this tradition stem from? What's the shoresh, the root of this tradition? It does not go back to Moshe, as tradition says, or if you accept tradition, fine, that's a self-evident truth. But if you want to research it outside of that, what are the markers that we can use to tell chronologically how far back this tradition goes? And I think that if we admit, and this is just my opinion, if we admit that tradition was a result of nationalizing the community in captivity and trying to find a legal premise of creating, or what is called in the academic realm, taking familial cults, things that would use or practice indoors or in courtyards by family groups amongst the Jews, and nationalize that as a way to bring all those groups together, and then now finding a means of instructing that. And again, we see this in Ezra and Nehemiah. We see this in those books in the Tanakh. It shows that that's what they initiated. That's what they started. And from that, we get this instruction, this rigid instruction method that is taught in rabbinic Judaism. Because the Pharisees are the ones that picked up that tradition, and then they became the champions of the people to uphold Torah. And they were the ones, their offsprings were the ones, and when I say offsprings, I don't mean literal biological, but their students were the ones responsible for responding to the destruction of the temple as a means to say, how do we preserve this? We know we're not going to be in this land long because the occupation has been here for hundreds of years and we have not been redeemed from it, but we don't want to lose this thing that is sacred to us. And I think that that is you giving the flowers to those in captivity, in Persian captivity, for creating the system, right? So that way you can have what you have today instead of trying to throw it all the way back to Moses and Joshua, where it's very difficult to show that the providence goes that further back, right? So I just want, if that's okay with the mods, thank you for allowing me to say that. So that way my position is open. You see where I'm coming from? I'm not
God,
holding any aces up the sleeve, right?
I
And
understand.
gotcha. And finally, I want to read this real quick because I was mentioning something in regards to the instruction method that you get when you are within that system. And I think that it was very, very key that speaking to Rabbi Abba, that he was saying about the system, and this is what the system instructors, that the system teaches, and all this stuff like that. And what I want to say is this, right? Let me read this source for you real quick. Let me pull it up. I had to close it back up. And again, I guess another go around, I would love to hear what the rabbi has to say about this, if he's even familiar with it, or maybe he doesn't care. I don't know. To see how this like instruction system came about. So this is from a book called A Search for the Origins of Judaism. And again, when I get a breather, I'll post this in the chat for you guys. And this is on page 43, which says, From Cyrus to the Mishnah. Very, very important chapter of this book. If you want to see some of the stuff that I'm saying, right? So in this, this is on page. Let me see if I want to do. Let me pick up here. I want to pick up where I want to pick up. I just lost my place going through it.
Is this the book by Etienne Nodet? Is that the book you're referencing? A Search for the
Sorry, say
Origins
it
of
again. I was looking for
Judaism?
it. Yes,
Sorry, A
yes,
Search.
yes. Correct.
Etienne Nodet?
Yes,
Nodet? Yeah.
yes.
Just for those who are interested, if you want to buy a hardcover version of it, it's cost $245 on Amazon.
That's what I was getting
It
ready to say.
does.
Just getting ready to say. And that Suchard book that you recommended in another room, The Development of Hebrew Bibles, that's almost like a
Yep.
couple of $100. So you
Oh
must be a
yeah.
very wealthy man.
Well, I'm not going to say I'm a wealthy man. I just take this seriously. So I purchased the stuff, right? Both the physical and the digital for the benefit of others, right? So that they are aware of what's out there and they can do this research themselves. I don't want nobody to believe anything that I'm saying, right? So it's not being wealthy, it's just what you value. I value this information, so I invest in it, right? So I take some time, put dollar by dollar aside, and then I invest in it. You know what I'm saying? And then the benefit of that, the byproduct of that, is that I get to share it with you guys. Something that I bought, now I'm sharing it with you. That cost me hundreds of dollars. You know what I'm saying? But let me just read this for you. And again, all the time, anytime I recommend something, I always recommend you go and actually support the author and buy the book physically as well. Right. So what I give you to look at, you can actually read it from my library. and not actually download it. But people have found some way to circumvent that. But I do that to inspire you to go and support the author who put all that work into putting that book together and to actually own it in your library. Okay. All right, so let me get back to what I was saying. I don't want to lose my point before I hand it over to Mordecai, because I would love for him to give some feedback on what me and Abba was speaking about. And again, I think Abba brought out a very reasonable position, right, from somebody who can see things out of the lens of religiosity, and just some people are unable to do so. So I appreciate him for that, right? So here, this is on page 25, and this on page 25, it starts to bring out Nehemiah and Ezra, right, on page 25. And it says here, the immediate outcome of the events just discussed is lost now. He's talking about the history during that time, then in Persian history. And there certainly is a chronological gap. However, Ezra 7:1 provides a quick linking of events, since after these events, there immediately follows the story of Ezra, which covers Ezra 7 and 10. And this is continuing Nehemiah 8, where Ezra solemnly reads the law, and perhaps in Nehemiah 9 and 10. The book of Nehemiah is presented as the memoirs of Nehemiah, a title borrowed from 2 Maccabees 2:13, and the first person supplemented by other material, especially about Ezra. The consequence of this is that they become contemporaries. Ezra was authorized to establish the law in Jerusalem. Nehemiah rebuilt the city, and both carry out religious reforms, right? Which I don't think any Jew in here would disagree with. But what does that consist of, right? Nevertheless, the chronological details provided separate them a little. The dates given in the report of Ezra fell within the 7th year of Artaxerxes, which is Ezra 7 and 10 and 9, while Nehemiah lived in Judea from the 20th to the 13th to the 32nd, year of Artaxerxes, and returned later under the same king. As a matter of fact, the only patches not editorially overloaded where Ezra and Nehemiah are mentioned together is Nehemiah 12 and 26. It is a redactional summary joining Ezra and Nehemiah together with the dynasty of high priests. In addition, a third episode in the time of Artaxerxes is recounted. It involved a forced interruption of work in Jerusalem on the initiative of the people in Ezra 4:7 to 24. As there were three Artaxerxes, it is necessary first of all to connect these events to precise reigns, and that's important. So let me jump down just to give you like a background. So I'm jumping down. I'm getting here to this. I'm getting to this part right here on page 27, right? And it says, let's consider the separately then before trying to propose a relationship between the two of them, right? They seem, in fact, to be open to being treated independently. The biblical tradition magnified Nehemiah as if he had been the real restorer of post-exilic Judaism and forgot Ezra, while in the rabbinic tradition, on the contrary, Ezra was elevated and identified with the prophet Malachi, right? As for Ezra, he was a priest, but his genealogy is particular. He was claimed to be an immediate descendant of the high priest Seraiah, taken captive to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, which would put him long before Cyrus. So we start to see historically some things that seem problematic, but tradition would say that doesn't matter. I'm showing this to you so you can see the development in the social, political, and religious rights that these people actually applied during that time, given the auspices of rule that was governing them. And if you don't understand this history, or you ignore it or push it aside, then you're not going to understand how that authoritative spirit, for those that say, no, this is authoritative and you need to bind yourself to it. You don't know the source of that. And I don't blame those people. Like Abba said, they're keeping the system alive. They're part of the system, right? But if we're looking at the history of the system, let's see where it comes from, right? So now we see that we have a separate dealing with Nehemiah, a separate dealing with Ezra, but a redaction puts them together in Nehemiah 12:26. How do you know that that's a redaction? You look at that style of writing within the body of the entire corpus of that passage, right? So you take one little line or two or three lines, depending on how many it is, and you see how the writing style differs and or makes slight scribal errors that is not displayed elsewhere in the entire passage. And remember, these were scrolls, right? That was written. They were not books or codices that come much later. So you got to understand that this is very important, because in scrolls, you also have marginal notes that occur in scrolls that then enter their way into the text over time. And we can demonstrate that that actually happened by just looking at the textual transmission of the Masoretes, which is another conversation altogether,
That's
right?
correct.
So looking at this, right? I'm trying to get further so I can go right into the meat and potatoes instead of giving you all this history. Is this what I'm looking for here? Man, I had the page, but I had to close it and open it back up. Let me see if this is where I'm at. Let me see where I'm at. Hellenization was a
Just
struggle of
to
rich families.
just to,
Okay.
just to speak to what you was talking about, I was
Oh, you
looking
got
into
it.
that.
Just buy me some time, Yoel, so I can grab this real
Yeah,
quick.
I was looking into that, and according to Josephus, most of his narrative comes from the book of First Esdras. Believe it or not, when Josephus speaks on Ezra and Nehemiah, most of his conversation comes from the book of First Esdras. Not even Ezra and Nehemiah in our Textus Receptus, what we have, those of us that use the KJV, he doesn't even speak from that. He speaks from First Esdras with most of his histories. That's interesting because people try to shoot down the Apocrypha and say that that came later and is a second century writing and it's spurious. But those same people use Josephus to make points. I found that very interesting because Josephus himself is not acknowledging the Masoretic text as far as what he quotes concerning Ezra. He quotes strictly from First Esdras. I thought that was very interesting when I was doing these studies, and hearing you talk about it, it reminded me about that, coming across that information.
And when
You good now?
and when I show you, Joel, from the Apocrypha where it says that Mary was from the seed of David, all of a sudden you're gonna back away from it and say, "Oh, no, no, but I can't use that. But I can't use that." And I got the sword,
before you
and I
start
got the
suggesting what
sword.
I
And as
might
soon as I
say,
show
before
you,
you
you're gonna say,
before you
but
start
not that one. I
before you
can't use
start
that.
suggesting before you start suggesting what I might
That's
say,
exactly what
I
you're gonna
have
do.
no problem. I have no problem with smoking you with a Bible, but you got to stay in order on my stages. You can't behave like how you normally
Oh, I'm
behave.
behaving.
It's
Cut it
not
out,
gonna work.
man. I'm
It's not
behaving.
gonna. So just stay on mute until it's your turn. There's a couple people
Yeah,
before you, but
and when it's my turn, I'm gonna
trust me,
bring out the
nobody.
source, and you're gonna back
All
away.
right, all right,
And
all right, all
suddenly
right.
you're
So,
gonna make an excuse.
yo, you gonna force me? You're gonna
But not that.
force
But
me.
not that one.
I can't. I
Watch,
can't move
watch.
you. I can't move. I can't move you to the audience. I have to kick you out of the room in this room format. Don't make me. Just chill. Divine, you got it. What you looking for? You on mute if you talking.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm multitasking. I'm working and doing this
Yeah,
with Shaw
yeah.
at the same time. So yeah. Man, I just closed the page that I was looking for, but nonetheless, what I'll do is I'm a multitask just so I can shut my mouth and other people can speak and I can step away for a second. If
hmm
Mordecai is there, can you give some commentary based on the dialogue that me and Abba have uh, earlier and let me know your position on the things that we said? And from
Yeah.
there, I'd like to engage you for a few moments. So you have the floor.
First, yeah, it was a great dialogue between you guys, you and Abba. I don't know if he's still in the room, but I think to have a fair discussion, or if a person truly wanted to understand, what this whole thing is about, right? We got to go and ask like very high level questions, which is, one of which, and these are discussion points, in our tradition, and we have to ask ourselves like, why did God create the world to even begin with? Like, why did God create creation, the entity, the all powerful, the magnificent, beyond our logic, beyond our imagination? Why did the creator decide to create a world? And so this is a discussion, in many of our books, a lot of it's in coded language, right? But that discussion goes like this, right? God, being this benevolent entity, wanted had a desire for in a way that we can understand it. This is beyond us, but we're going to try to understand it through our human terms. God had this desire to bestow itself, right? So what God did was create what you call nefesh chaya, right? These living souls, right? And these living souls were attached to the creator, and the creator was able to bestow its light on these original set of souls, if we could call them that, these living souls, right? And so these living souls were receiving endlessly from the creator. And what happened is that these souls started to have this dynamic of shame, meaning that they were receiving endlessly, but they wanted to be like the creator, themselves and also have something to share with themselves. So they were in this place called receiving. We call it the bread of shame, right? They were receiving this bread, but it was like, but it was a bread of shame. It's like if you have a rich friend who takes you out to eat every day, eventually it's like, hey man, let me pay for the bill, right? 'Cause it's a sense of shame, right? And so that dynamic of shame made these original living souls pull back, kind of revolt against the creator. And this revolt that they did in the upper world, in the endless world, created a void, right, between them and the creator. This void, this like kind of like black hole, I guess if you want to call it, this is the beginning of what we call creation, right? And so these souls had such a desire that this endless reality that was created, or this void that was created between them and the creator, started to develop personalities. The heavens, the earth, tohu vuhu, light, ve'ahi or, all the different things that we hear about in creation were a byproduct of these original souls' desire to be like the creator in creating time, space, motion. Why? Because the whole concept was to remove the shame and to actualize this concept of bihira, which is free will. Right. And so this free will allowed them to choose how they wanted to receive God's light and what degree they wanted to receive God's light, so on and so on and so on. Right. And so that dynamic became what we now, in the sixth day of creation, these clay vessels were formed, right? These clay vessels that came from the earth were formed, and then those vessels is where God breathed his soul, breathed a soul, a neshama, into the nostrils, and then it became a living human being. So the whole context of everything that we see in reality was created by the imagination of these original souls that wanted to be like the creator and to create a mechanism of time, space, and motion, in essence, to be able to reveal and determine the amount of light. So when we talk about things like the halakha, when
Hey,
we talk about,
before you advance, where did you get this understanding? Where what did you read, or where were you instructed to see the Genesis that way?
we have a book called the Zohar, which is one of our most mystical
Which is a forgery.
documents.
I'm sorry, what?
Zohar is a pseudo epigraphic forgery. I'm just reading the book on that right now. That's nothing to do with what we're talking about. It's a bunch of
Well,
copyrighted
wait, wait,
mumbo
wait,
First of
wait,
jumbo
all,
wait, wait,
quiet,
wait.
talking
Just for
about
quiet,
nothing.
fairness, just
quiet.
for
You're
just
not
for wait,
quiet.
wait, wait. I got you. I got you.
I hear you, Joe, but I'm talking about this other guy who wants to pretend he's a scientist. Go
Yes,
ahead.
I'm talking to him. So whether you agree or disagree is irrelevant. When someone is speaking, you got the people on this stage. I made this room very social. All you got to do is open your mic and you'll be up here. I can't put you in the audience. I have to kick you out. So the only thing I ask as a rule to the room is wait till you have the floor to say what you need to say. And when the build becomes your build, it'll run its course. But just don't unmute and make it random chaos, because we it's nothing we could do in this room except kick you out the room. We can't even mute you. I mean, put you in the audience. So we just got to have a
And
very, very
Yeah,
civil
yeah,
discourse today.
yeah, and I'll make it enjoy as a broad statement. Anybody who claims that they are a halakhic Jew that rejects the Zohar is a fakester. He has nothing to do with the tradition, and
Gangster.
if anything, he's just hiding from his blackness by being around a bunch of white people. But anyways, my point is saying that,
Damn.
so in our tradition, right? In our tradition, we have in the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis, this is the outline that allows us to understand. This outline is expressed in coded language in our Talmud and in also in our Midrashim. This is all there. So don't even you're disrespecting yourself talking about the Zohar, right? But the point is, so this structure, so this dynamic of these original souls came down all into one context, which is Adam, right? And Adam was the first man who had this dynamic. So when Adam was in the Garden of Eden, he was given an instruction manual from, according to our tradition, the angel Raziel, right? The angel Raziel came and he was accompanied by two other angels, and they brought Adam the instructions on how to connect to God's divine light, how the instructions, the spiritual technology. The spiritual technology was utilized to, if we want to understand it, like Adam instructed his sons to make sacrifices, right? Cain and Hevel. This is where their disagreement
Anything,
started,
man.
right? Because
Finish
God
up
responded
anyway.
one and after the other. But this technology to bring sacrifices and all these things came through this book that was given to him. When Adam and Eve fell out, when Adam and Eve fell out of the garden because they disobeyed God, then from there, then that information was passed on to other generations. But it's important to note that Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, receiving endlessly from the Creator, receiving endlessly, and this endless receiving, they still revolted against God because what the Nachash, the serpent, told them, you can be like the Creator. So this same mechanism I explained to you that happened in the endless reality when there was no physicality, and you had these original souls, that same reality, that dynamic was also played out in the Garden of Eden. And then from there, you had Cain and Abel. They never really manifested children. And then you had Seth, which was the progenitor, and it went from 10 generations from Adam, and that information was passed on to went to Noah. During the time of Noah, how do people in the world today have power over other people? Right, I'm talking about today in 2023 or the last 1,000 years. How is it that some people had information to rule over other people with information? Because this wisdom and knowledge of this wisdom was passed around, and certain people got it that were impure, and certain people got it, that did the right things with it, like people like Noah. But during Noah's generation, there were other people who had this information and they used it to do terrible things. They misused it this to the point, even after the flood of Noah, this wisdom through Noah still persisted in this world through his children. And it even went into the generation of Babel when they wanted to build a tower to supersede the creator. Right. So this is the dynamic of this wisdom. So it keeps going all the way down from Noah to 10 generations later. Then Noah has this flood, whatever. He has this whole situation where he laid naked. This information now went on to another 10 generations to Abraham, right? But the difference between Abraham and the other people is that Abraham was a new model of a soul, right? So when the Torah tells us in Parsha Lekukah, I think it's is it the 12th chapter in Bereshit in Genesis, and the Torah says, Vayomer Elohim Avram, right? Hashem says to Avraham, but it doesn't say Avraham, it's Avram, right? So our sages derive that word Avram could be understood in two parts: Av, father, and Ram, father. Light, supernal. So this new soul that's coming into reality is a soul that can actually hold the light, because Adam wasn't able to hold it. Noah in the generations between Adam and Noah weren't able to hold it. Noah was not able to hold it. So Abraham was the completion or the completed vessel that was able, or the perfected vessel that was able to receive this light and disseminate it in a righteous way. Anyways, fast track that through his sons to Israel. The children of Israel are actually the souls of the original conversation that God had in the endless world. So the souls of Israel are the souls that are able to receive this light, properly bring it down, and disseminate it. Now, the whole idea of halacha, the whole idea of the whole system of the Hebrew calendar, everything that we do, all the connections, whatever, it's all designed to remove that bread of shame. So we could turn from people who just receive for ourselves alone in order to become beings of receiving for the sake of sharing. This is the transformational process that the Torah and the halacha are trying to get us to. So the dynamic, if we want to understand what this whole thing is, we could pick and choose and say, hey, I disagree with this, and then I have a point to say this. But the bottom line is that the whole purpose of creation was for the children of Israel to remove this bread of shame that we received in the endless world, and to inspire the other creations, humans, other nations, and even animals to a degree, to function in the proper system of the Creator. So that's why we have Shabbat. That's why we have different holidays. All these things are to connect us to this divine light that we had in the endless world. But now we become bestowers of that on everything. So I see what Divine Prospect saying. I think he's a brilliant person. He's a great example of brilliance. especially from our community. So I see everything you see in the academic. But in order to understand why the halakha even exists, why the Jewish people or the Israelites exist, why this whole process, why we have to go through different exiles, the whole thing is to go through this process of becoming these perfected souls that could reunite with the Creator without any shame. I land my plane.
Okay, can I speak now? I wanna read
Not
you.
yet, sir. 1 second. 1 second.
Okay.
Let me
All
just.
right.
I found what I was looking for. So let me just, if it's okay with you all, to read it. Um, if y'all can bear with me, and then I just want to thank Mordecai for that position. Mordecai, you know I appreciate you as a teacher and as a brother. We disagree on some things, but some things we do agree on, and I like when you take that esoteric approach to give some insight on some things. But you know, there's still things that we disagree on. You know what I'm saying? What I want to say is this, right? I just want to give people a historical position so they can kind of see based on these two sources, right? Once I shut up and share it in the chat, you can start to see the development of what we call the oral Torah, or that tradition, right? Of Torah by mouth. And I think it's very interesting historically to see how this developed. And this is why I say I want to give credit where credit is due to those who are actually the proponents of formalizing this oral tradition of instruction. So that way they can get their flowers. We don't have to push it past them. We could just center it where it actually developed. And let me give you some insights. I'm going to read from two sources. I mentioned some of them earlier. The first one I'm going to read, this is from a book called Household Sex and the Origins of Rabbinic Judaism. And the second one I'm going to read by was the first source that I had earlier. I was just trying to find the page number, and I actually found it. I had to read through 16 chapters, 16 pages, just to find what I was looking for, and I found it. So, in Household Sex, this is on page 2, right? And it says this. There's a scholar by the name of Elias Bickerman, right? So it says, starting with Elias Bickerman, scholars began to make consistent attempts to establish a connection between the rise of Jewish schools formed around lay intellectuals and Hellenistic influences on Judaism. Bickerman suggests that the Pharisees had embraced a Hellenistic emphasis on education as the single most important task, social task. The Pharisees sought to transform Jews into a holy nation through education, just as Hellenism believed that education could so transform the individual and the entire people that the nation would be capable of fulfilling the divine task set it. According to the Pharisees, piety was teachable and could be attained only through teaching. Bickerman further observes that the Pharisees did not limit their education to the Torah of Moses. Instead, they added many principles wanting in the Torah, something that eventually would evolve into the oral law of rabbinic Judaism. According to Bickerman, the Pharisaic idea of education promoted the tendency to develop the Torah as time and circumstance demanded. In other words, it was the centrality and religious value of education that resulted in the formation of the oral law and determined its importance for rabbinic Judaism. Bickerman's observation that the ideal of formalized Greek style study and the idea of the oral law are interrelated will prove crucial for a proper understanding of rabbinic Judaism, although his attempt to place this combination back into the Hasmonean period was probably anachronistic. This attempt is better explained by the power of a historiographic tradition on this subject more than anything else. Martin Hengel's thorough discussion of cultural and educational changes brought about by Hellenism in Jewish Palestine puts meat on the bones of a somewhat schematic outline of these changes provided by Bickerman. Hengel specifically focuses on Jason's attempt to introduce Greek education in Jerusalem in the time immediately preceding the Maccabean revolt, as well as subsequent Greek-style educational institutions in Second Temple Jewish Palestine. He then proceeds to discuss the development of the Jewish school, which emerges as a result of these changes in educational and cultural patterns. Hengel observes that the description of disciple circles and their studying techniques in rabbinic literature closely parallels that of the Greek rhetorical schools. Like Bickerman, Hengel correctly notices the centrality of Hellenistic cultural and educational patterns for understanding rabbinic Judaism. Like Bickerman, he tries to locate this development sometime during the Hellenistic and Hasmonean periods and then see it unfold into the mature rabbinic form in 200 CE. Bigger Gerhardson's important study on methods of transmission of oral traditions in Judaism follows similar methodological assumptions. Like the two previous scholars, Gerhardson recognizes the centrality of Greek-style study circles and their learning techniques in the formation of some of the basic notions of rabbinic Judaism, including the centrality of oral traditions in early rabbinic Judaism. Gerhardson also tries to trace these developments back to the Hellenistic period, emphasizing the importance of formalized teaching and teaching techniques for the preservation and transmission of the Torah. He further discusses the importance of schools for the study of oral Torah for preservation and transmission of the oral Torah. In both cases, Gerhardson freely uses predominantly rabbinic evidence to account for what was going on in the Second Temple Judaism. He also interprets Second Temple Judaism in light of this later evidence, thus unintentionally imposing the perspective of later rabbinic sources on Second Temple Jewish texts. The latter practice is in fact characteristic of all three authors and illustrates just how powerful the traditional reading of the text is. Still, like Bickerman and Hengel, Gerhardson correctly recognizes the centrality of formalized Hellenistic study and practices in their institutional settings for the development of rabbinic Judaism. He further stresses the importance for the development of oral tradition and its predominant status in rabbinic Judaism. I'm going to stop there. There's more that this goes into, and it actually parses through those correlations so you can see the chronological timestamps on how this method of teaching oral tradition occurred during that period of time. And again, it's credited back to the Pharisees that developed or came about during the Grecian rule. This is very important because it's a way of you teaching lay intellectuals. It's a method. It is a approach that we don't have any record of happening prior to this period of time that was formalized in Judea, where the Jews were located at. So let me read from the second source and I'll shut up. And again, this book is called Household, Sex, and the Origins of Rabbinic Judaism. And I'll share it with you in the chat when I'm done. The second source that I wanted to read, right, goes back to the book called A Search for the Origins of Judaism. And this is on page 55. Okay. And it says this. Morphologically, or so the heading is Rabbinic Tradition in Galilee. Morphologically, rabbinic literature, which begins with the Mishnah, has every appearance of being an innovation in style, language, and content. It is not interested in history as such and mentions events only in connection with juridical and homiletical developments. In every sense, the particulars that can be gleaned from it on persons and events are not very numerous. Amongst them, few are earlier than the war of Bar Kokhba and destruction of Jerusalem, and still fewer are prior to the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. You see that? That's very important. Keep that in mind. Besides, the Mishnah is a kind of oral literature supposed to be transmitted from master to disciple and not to be handed over to any reader. And this is what I was saying to Abba earlier about initiates and lay people looking at it from a cursory, but initiates seeing it from the inside. This is characteristic of a closed group. In other respects, even if the Bible is not missing, this literature is in no way a biblical exegesis, since it proceeds from another source. At the turn of the first century CE, Ishmael and Akiba, the leading figures of this tradition at that time, were innovators in striving to show, by the use of certain hermeneutical laws, that oral tradition and the Bible form one Torah alone and not two. That is to say, that the oral tradition, which alone is normative, can be considered to be proceeding from what was written. This is summarized in a rabbinic axiom. Remember these terms that was coming out with me and Abba earlier? I just want y'all to follow this, right? The words of the scribes are more important than those of the written Torah, Sanhedrin 11:6. And again, there could be another conversation on how that's interpreted. It is strange, however, that this systematic reappropriation of what is written only happened so late. These features show a remarkable contrast with the work of Philo of Alexandria, from whom the law, which he strives to explain according to the Decalogue, is derived in its entirety from the Bible, in fact, essentially from the Pentateuch. Besides, he had the
Shalom,
explicit desire
niggas!
to publish it.
Shalom, niggas! You bunch of niggers! I'm a true Israelite! Oh, shalom! Shalom, shalom, shalom!
Can the
This is
mods
why I
roll that
advocate
in? What's
slavery for
going
the
on right
Negroes.
now? This is crazy. Wow. All
That
right. Let
spirit,
me
that
just finish
spirit
this
Legions.
came
up.
in there.
Legions.
That's crazy. All right, so let me finish reading this, right? So, and this is important. Everything that I'm saying is important to understand the history on how this developed, and this is why I say give credit to what credit is due. And it says here, it says, besides, he had explicit desire to publish it, this is Philo, and make it understood by everyone, since this law, or nomos, is the law of the world, whose unity is in that of the logos. That is why it begins with creation. It involves a Stoic view connected to the utopia of an ideal city. For Philo, this has two consequences. On the one hand, the one who observes the law, and this one alone, is a true inhabitant of the world, or cosmopolites. On the other hand, the written laws, as a system of positive law, come second, though not secondarily. It was in this way, he explains in a preamble to the treatise of the Decalogue, that the patriarchs before the time of moments are incarnations of the law. Consequently, they express by their being a non-written law. The genuine sage is the one who gives direction without relying on any written text. This is to say, without any external precept, and this can only be the result of a divine pedagogy or a divine election. Moses is at the one and the same time king, priest, and prophet, or again, a living law and gifted with speech. There is consequently inspiration, habitus, and not dictation of an oracle. In other words, the non-written law, universal and in conformity with nature, is not for Philo an external traditional datum, but the result of a harmony with the created world. And of course, he's saying this from a Hellenized perspective. Let me jump down a little further and get past what he's saying. I'm going on page 58. It says, in other respects, even if both of them are Pharisaic in spirit, Josephus and the rabbinic tradition strangely ignore one another. Josephus knows the Jabne, but totally ignores the fact that there was any academy there at the time of the destruction. On the subject of the salvaging institutions, the only thing he mentions is a more or less focused migration of priests from Jerusalem to Gophna in Judea in War of Jews 6:114. The prologue of Pirkei Avot mentions as ancestors responsible for the transmission of the tradition, Shemaiah and Abtalion, then Hillel and Shammai, with a certain discontinuity between the two pairs, but at all times of Herod. Josephus knew that the first two, at least late in life, but not the second two. Now, Hillel was a Babylonian, and his elevation to head of the school on occasion of some crisis happened in the Babylonian colony of Bathira in Golan, founded by the same Herod. This marginal situation implies that the rabbinic tradition, although wanting to be the heir to the memories of Jerusalem and the temple, had its origins, in fact, far from the ruling cities of Jerusalem. This would explain perfectly why Josephus ignores them altogether or even would not want to know about them. In a similar way, Josephus only discovered Christianity in Rome when he could not deny it a certain social importance. Let me end it off here. This reference to Halal and Bathira draws attention to neighboring Galilee, which was far from Judea and separated from it besides by a hostile Samaria. As a matter of fact, while Galilee also, on the whole role, plays nothing central to the Bible, three historical phrases make it necessary to take it seriously. First of all, shortly after the time of Herod, Jesus, quote unquote, recruited disciples there in a rural setting with strong religious traditions. Then, at the time of the War of 66 CE, Josephus disparages the Galileans, but cannot hide their strong religious motivations. Finally, towards the end of the 2nd century CE, the Mishnah originated there, again in rural surroundings. And there are grounds for wondering whether this was a natural cradle for it or the random result of a forced migration after the prohibition of Judaism in Judea in 135 CE. It must be added that this Mishnah was immediately adopted or imposed in Babylonia. In short, it is a matter of evaluating the origins of this Jewish Galilee, so remote from Jerusalem that it could be considered more cosmopolitan, a Galilee of the nations. The preceding observation suggests, nevertheless, that it would not be a stranger to the flow of Babylonian immigrants, even in very late periods. And I'm going to stop there. But if you continue to read on the end of page 59, that goes conclusion, outline of a method, all the way to page 62, is only 3 pages. It sums everything up so you can kind of see chronologically these independent variables that are developing, how they come congruently together into this, what we call, I would say, the formation of the style of the oral tradition and how it's structured, how it's legalized, how it's binding. And it comes from what happens in captivity that goes back to Nehemiah and Ezra, which I was trying to read earlier, and flows all the way down to the first century and ends up in Galilee and comes into contact with Babylonian immigrants that then, with their exposure to this, bring this knowledge and information back with them to Babylon. And then you have sages that are there in Babylon that begin to see this work and begin to add to it. Now, we're going to see something different from traditionalists and fundamentalists. Oh, no, that's not true, blah, blah. And they'll say, this is the tradition that we received, and this is how you should accept it. But there's a lot of variables that they cannot account for. But if you look at it like this, freely, objectively, and evaluate it, you start to see these things come together and give credit where credit's due. And I yield.
That's heavy. Mordecai.
Yeah, I mean, what he's given is a description on how the what we call the oral tradition was compiled into text and where, where I guess on the academic from originating from. But we're saying that this information of how to separate pure and impure in our life, which is basically the whole basis of the Talmud, right? And because it's discussing the laws, right? And other aspects too, but just mainly the laws and the outlook. That dynamic is existed since the beginning of creation, but it became codified in a community on Mount Sinai, later to be expressed explicitly as Brother Prolific is bringing out during maybe this time of Ezra and Babylon and this whole process of integration. I'm not refuting that, right? I'm not refuting that. I'm more so saying that we can't say that this idea and this inspiration to understand and express the tradition started there. But in terms of it being put in a particular text, described in a certain way with certain fonts and all these different things, yeah, I don't see any conflict there.
Okay, so I appreciate that. And let me just sum it up because I know I read a lot. So let me just sum it up, right? When you read the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, you will see an imposition of authority on the people with a nationalist agenda to keep everything centralized to the book that they found, the book of the law. And that this was instrumental in the unification of the Jews returning back from Babylon to rebuild the city, the temple, and the walls, right? So you have to be innovative in your imposition of authority, which Nehemiah had, which Ezra would have had, right? So what we start to see is there's certain elements of instruction, forced instruction from an authoritative figure to the layman that starts to occur during the Persian captivity, right? And this develops over time. We have tablets that shows how the Jews lived in Judea. Matter of fact, let me read this source for you real quick. I'm not going to read anything from it. It's going to give you the source and you can actually examine it for yourself. The name of this book is called, let me pull it up real quick. One of them is called Exile and Return, The Babylonian Context by Jonathan Stockel, right? And the other one is called, where is it at? I got so many books open up here. Household and Family Religion in Persia. I think I read this earlier. Uh, Persian period, Judah, and archaeological approach. And the reason why I bring this up is because what oral tradition in the form of the Talmud that we have codified from both the Mishnah and Talmud, and also the Midrashim as well, I want to include that as well. We don't have a lot of discussion based on the day-to-day life in Babylon. Now, there's things that are alluded to when you deal with the Book of Lamentations, right? And there's commentary on that, but nothing specific. And if anything is given, we don't see anything that could correlate what we actually found in the archaeological data, which we exhumed stuff from that region at that period of time of Jews that were living under Achaemenid Reed or Persian rule, right? And what you'll start to see is because there was a propaganda to unify the people, because remember, what was the auspices of Nehemiah joining in this rebuilding? It's because he was getting word as somebody that was close to the king that, oh, we're having trouble and the people can't do this. And you see that in Nehemiah chapter 1. So he has to leave his post to go and help with this project, right? So in order to get that done, he's using his authority that's not coming from the Most High. The Most High is not saying, "Hey, we're going to do this. I'm going to use you to do this. I'm going to send a prophet." No, he's coming in to step in because of his authority and him being able to get resources and etc. from the Persian king to go and assist these exiles in rebuilding the city, temple, and the walls historically. So you start to see him say things or start to force things on the people with intermarriage. You start to see intermarriages occur, and he witnesses it. And he says, "Oh no, we can't do this, and you got to separate from this." He starts imposing things. When he sees people coming in right before the Sabbath gates are closing, he starts to grab them by the beard and he starts to beat them and say, "Yo, I'm gonna lay hands on you if you do A, B, and C again." We start to see the excise of power from an individual who's a Jew that is at the probably the upper echelons of authority that a Jew can get, which is right next to the Persian king, and using that as a means of imposition to teaching the layman. We get that second more from Ezra, and when they were reading the book of the law, and then they had to give the sense. This is where the history of the Targums come from. The Targumim comes from them having to teach Aramaic speaking exiles the liturgical Hebrew found in the book, and because they can't read it anymore or understand it, it's somewhat mutually intelligible, but some stuff they can understand, they had to give them the sense. Who? The priesthood and the elders who still knew and spoke colloquial Hebrew that's found in that book of the law. So now you get this instruction from teacher to student by means of history, things that are going on in the history of the Jews. And then finally, when you transition from that and you look at the development of the Pharisaic sect, under the Grecian rule and captivity, there was schools of learning and instructions amongst the Greeks, and that was one of the impositions of Hellenism. This is how we get the Library of Alexandria and other astute Library of Caesarea, etc. And they started creating these schools of instruction, being able to teach the lay intellectuals. The Pharisees come from out of that because how was the Pharisees gathered? Well, the Pharisees aren't all Levites. They were gathered because of a political situation, a political crisis that was happening. That's the formation of the Pharisees. And now when we see that they then become the astute teachers, teaching the students with an instruction method that's eerily similar to what the Greeks were already doing prior to that, it begs the question. This system that is used now, did it start then? Does it go back further than that? We see the root, the shoresh of this in Ezra Nehemiah. You can read it in the Tanakh yourself, and then you get this period of time during the Maccabean rule and the history in the Greco period, in which the development and the evolution of the Pharisaic group comes about, and then later on we start to see in the First Temple period. The destruction of the temple, a new system was developed in order to teach people a new means of supplementing the daily sacrifice through your prayers start to develop. A new system begins. And when you go to the Talmud, it eerily ignores things that happened prior to this period of time. Historical events that, if it did go all the way back that far, references could have been made to it, but we see little of that. This is why I say you look for chronological timestamps, and it will show you where things begin.
Let me
So,
ask you this. Let me ask you this.
okay, go ahead. Go ahead, brother. You got it.
I think basically the information that you laying down is saying that the Talmud does not originate with Moses and his judges. You basically saying it has an origin and it comes around Second Temple period.
Yes,
Is that
that's
basically what you're
correct. And
saying?
that's the leading consensus. Now, again, I understand fundamentalists of Judaism are going to disagree with that. Why? Because it undermines their primary premise. Remember that axiom that is supposed to be self-evidently true that you don't question that
Right.
Abba said? I say no, question it. Because what happens is now a new system, and again, remember that system that Nehemiah went and said, yo, I'm going to put hands on y'all if y'all don't do A, B, and C? Well, you have the same brunt force throughout the history of rabbinic Judaism on individual Jew and Jewish sects over time that do not subscribe to rabbinic authority. We start to see the same spirit come about. But that's another conversation altogether. All I'm simply trying to demonstrate is that if you look at this objectively and put all the pieces together, there's nothing that goes back further than that. Because one thing that I would actually challenge anybody who does subscribe to the Talmud and said that the oral tradition that's contained within it, whether from the rulings of the Sanhedrin or the Beit Din that we've seen in the Mishnah or the commentary given by the rabbi and the sages in the Gemara, give one historical event that they mention prior to Ezra Nehemiah. One historical event that they
Yeah,
mentioned that
but
we can
yeah,
verify existential to the text.
but divine. The issue with what you're saying is it would be no reason for us to rehash those events because it wasn't that they created some type of new Torah. right? The Talmud is existence since the beginning of everything, since the beginning of Moshe on Mount Sinai. Not the Talmud in terms of the physical sense that the book and the Mishnayot that were compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. I'm not saying that. What we're saying is that the tradition of there being a oral explanation on how to give circumcisions, how to build a sukkah, how
No,
to do
I
all
have
the
no,
different.
I have no issues with that, Mordecai. Right? That's why I said naturally, halakha has to develop in any Knesset that exists. Why? Because you're not given all the explicit instructions on how to carry out certain ordinances in the written Torah. I agree with that. I don't have any issue with that, right? Because we know other groups that are Jews that live outside. You mentioned the ones in Congo, right? Now I don't know how far back you date that because you got some rabbis there that you learn under, right? But what I'm saying is distant groups that probably were never exposed, which again we find out through Eldad Hadani. That's why I gave him as a case study. And remote places where Jews are scattered, they have their own halakha system that is predicated on the principles and axioms that they extract from the written Torah to the actual immediate context of the environment in which they live. Right. So, for
Yeah.
example, if I, and this is for you, Mordecai, if I lived in South Africa
Mhm.
and I'm a Jew, and we talk about in antiquity, right? And I'm
Mhm.
familiar with the written Torah. Maybe I might have a scroll or whatever, right, amongst my community or whatever, right? But we live in a remote place in exile. I know that as Jews, we keep the feasts, right? We keep the Chag, we keep
Mhm.
the feasts, right?
Mhm.
How am I supposed to give, like, let's say that I'm just commemorating it, right? Using it as a memorial. What would be my first fruits that I would take from the immediate land that I live if we don't have the same flora in that region? So, like in Israel, you have wheat and barley, wild wheat and barley that grow. But let's say I'm someplace that don't have wheat and barley. Let's say I want to keep um, uh, unleavened bread, right? Well, obviously, I
Yeah.
have to source it from something different. So then the community would have to come together and rule on, okay, how do we do this according to the principles in the written Torah, right? And this is what you get your basis for oral instructions from. I have no problem with that. Halacha is just naturally going to develop in any community that reads the written Torah, even my community. It's there,
Mhm.
right? The
Mhm.
problem is the claim of providence. I have no problem with the form that the Talmud is in right now. The issue I have is when this authority is imposed on Jews who decide they don't want to agree with it, and they're considered as goy. You're considered as a secularist. You're
I
obliged to
think.
the system, and because you don't want to hold to what the system says you're obliged to, now
Mhm.
we put you off. You're in sin, like Abba said, right?
Mhm.
That's a big problem. That's an
Okay.
issue.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
brother, you got it.
So on that point, I think the best example we can give is the example of the Ethiopian, the Beta Israel, right? As you mentioned. So even with them, they did not have that community did not have the Talmud Babali or the Talmud
Correct,
Yashani.
correct,
They did not
correct.
have that. However, to prove my point that what I'm saying to you is they still had a plethora of oral traditions that are exactly the same as the Jews in Morocco, exactly as the same as the Jews in Yemen, exactly the Jews in Ashkenaz, all these type of things. So even though they did not have that, right? And it wasn't exactly to the point that when they came here to Israel, it wasn't like they had to restructure the whole system. I mean, certain things of custom dress and these types of things that the next generation weren't so into, but they still had oral traditions that no man could have just thought up and be congruent with people he never met before, or you know what I'm saying. So that
No,
proves
but
the
and
point.
again, so that what that proves is that you're going to have commonalities in halacha. That's all that proves. Why? Because again, everything has its basis in the written Torah. So you're gonna have commonalities that evolve and emerge that are similar. Yes, I don't have any issue with that. Matter of fact, if they are Jews in a diaspora, it all depends on when they were exiled. That would show to what degree of oral tradition that they have that's congruent with another group that may have been exiled at the same time, right? So this is another thing that we have to look at as well. Commonalities will exist if they're all looking at that. You're going to have it. That doesn't mean everything's going to be the exact. As we see that the Minchagim that develops amongst the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim, they differ, right? We
Yep.
see those differences evolve over time. And then when they come back to back with each other, they're like, whoa, we got to standardize things. because things developed independently based on the lands in which they live and the axioms of the written Torah that they apply, which we call simply as halakha. That's all.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think we do agree on that point. We agree on the Beta Israel. There are a lot of unique ways of expressing Holocaust throughout the world. I think what your argument is that you're speaking from a Jewish perspective, and you're saying that, okay, you know what, this dynamic, this spirit of this totalitarianship of giving over rulership of who decides what and who decides this, came into existence during the time of Nehemiah and Ezra, right? That's the
Correct.
argument.
Correct.
Okay,
And
so
so
I
the
would,
lineage in rabbinic Judaism today, I'm saying that's its shoresh. Mhm.
okay, so I would argue and say that the shorish of that mentality um, happened when the people came to Shmuel and they asked him in the book of Shmuel to give them a king, right? And that king was supposed to be an authoritarian that was supposed to impose the halacha and was supposed to move the community forward. Now you could say that that spirit died down after when our kings started to go into different places of transgression and that authority was lost. You could say it recreated itself again during the times of Ezra and Nehemiah, but I would say that I would.
Ah, I got you. And again, I think we're on the same page. I just want you to stand on the fact that you said that the oral tradition encapsulated in the Talmud that we have today goes back, its lineage, and you gave us the whole lineage, the whole genealogical plot goes back to Moshe and Yehoshua. That's what you
Yeah,
said.
I heard that.
Do you still stand on that?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But
You do?
that's
Okay.
impossible with what you just said.
No,
He
we're
said
talking.
recreated. He
No,
said the Torah
the divine
recreated.
prospect. No, 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 no. I'm saying Divine's prospect. His argument point is on the totalitarian rulership of a halakhic outlook on the collective community. We're not arguing the authenticity of it. He agrees that there had to be an oral tradition since the time of Moses to apply the laws that God gave us in the Torah. Right. That's why the Jethro comes and tells them to design courts, right? That Moses wasn't directly governing, right? So we have a system that exists. We have the Book of Judges, right, where we had different communities in the land of Israel that had an authority over their particular tribes. So that oral application, I don't think we're in
Yes,
disagreement with.
but
The
you
disagree. This.
present you
Go ahead,
presented
Joel.
you presented as if that oral tradition was
Divinely
what we
inspired,
are
and what
reading.
we're seeing today. That's
Yeah,
the problem, and
yeah,
that's the issue.
it's not. And I also disagree with your approach to that. If we have Moses' law, and I possess, and I have a copy of it, which he commanded to be made, and Divine Prospect has a copy of it, we don't come up with a different writing and call it an oral tradition and suggest that it is a supplement to Moses' law. What we do is we accept the law for what it is, and we handle the sentences of judgment when people come to us with a matter that pertaineth to the law. What am I unclean to go to this feast day? Well, why do you ask? Oh, because I have this bright spot on my arm. Well, we got to go to Leviticus and see. And we're using the law that we received from God to make all of our decisions. The idea that you're presenting, that I'm picking up, is there's a supplement to that law that explains how to apply these laws themselves, and that is what the oral tradition is. And Moses was teaching that to all of his judges, and I don't see that scripturally. That's just me being honest with you.
Yeah, but Joel, I mean, I'm just saying on a matter of fact level,
Did that make
if
sense though? Like,
Mo-
Divine, did you understand what I said?
Yeah, clearly, I did.
Okay, so like, I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, Mordecai. I'm saying the law itself is the law that would have been orally transmitted. If you say that there is an oral law, the oral law would have been the same as that which was written on paper. That's what I'm basically getting at in a nutshell. And I believe you're telling me
that the oral law is a supplement to God's laws, which was given to Moses, that were taught together. You see what I'm trying to say? I disagree with that premise. I don't think it is so. I don't think there is such. I acknowledge the
So so
existence
so
of the.
hold
Oh,
on,
go
Joel.
ahead,
Let me
go
jump
ahead,
in.
go ahead.
So Mordecai, um, can you show us divine inspiration behind the oral Torah that we have today? Can you show us the divine inspiration behind it? Because if it is coming from that unbroken lineage that goes back to Moshe and Yoshua, can you show that divine inspiration? Because everything that was pulled out in regards to things that relate to like a Sahedrin or Beit Din or whatever ruling on the matters is things that's amongst the community. Like, for example, the argument that Joel made earlier, where the appeal was made to heaven and the voice came out, and all of that, and them rejecting that. You know what I'm saying? So can you show all divine inspiration in the oral Torah? Can you do that? Or what is the method that we can authenticate or divine inspiration in the oral Torah?
Well, I mean, the thing is, you did a good job earlier of going into, who the teachers were at different times, right? So when we talk about like the rabbis of the Mishnah, right? So like say like people like Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, different people of that time, the Tanaim of that generation, their teachers were teachers that came before them. Like when you're talking about the teachers of Shammai and Hillel, right? Shammai and Naphtali. Those teachers were a part of a lineage that they received before the generations of Rabbi Akiva, right? And then if you go to Shammai and Naphtali's teacher, those teachers were people who actually sat on the Sanhedrin, right? And those people in the Sanhedrin, some of which, like Malachi and Mordecai, all these different people, were considered even to be at the level of prophets, right? So it's just saying that this link goes back from the Sanhedrins, goes to the generation before them, which is the generation of the prophets, right? So they took the teachings of the prophets and they used that to deliberate over the Jewish people in the Sanhedrin. So it's just saying that the how we understand things orally come from this succession of lineage. I think, but what you're making is a unique argument, and it's a better argument than even what you're asking me. And let me correct me if I'm wrong. What you're saying is that if a community is in the middle of the sub-Saharan desert, and they're descendants of Jacob, and they have a tradition for 2,000 years of doing the Torah this way, doing the Torah that way, doing the Torah this way. You're saying, how does the mainstream Jewish community today dictate to them that, hey, if you want to come into the land of Israel and you want to be considered a part of the community and reap the benefits, you have to disregard this aspect of your tradition, enhance this part of your tradition, and take on this part of our tradition, and then we'll all be copacetic. That's a fair argument. That's a fair argument. That's a fair argument to say, if this was divinely inspired by some people who were in the Amazon, you know what I mean, or wherever, some random place where they didn't even have access to anything, is their tradition less important than people of the Sephardic or people who are Mizrahi or the people of Ashkenaz or the people of Hasidim, whatever? So that's why I
That's not
think
the
your
question.
argument is.
But that's not the question, Mordecai. The question is, where do you get your sense of divine inspiration from? It's not about who do you recognize as being capable of having divine inspiration. The question is, the Talmud and the Mishnah that we have right now, the Gemara in its totality, where is its claim of divine inspiration, and where do you get that from? That's the question, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
okay. So on that, yeah. So on that point, I think I answered it in terms of our tradition of the succession of how that information was passed on, right?
From Moses and Joshua, right?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. So it goes back to that. Okay. So and that's what I'm saying, right? So here's an example, Mordecai. Can you pull out something in the Chumash, right? That showcases that oral tradition is divinely inspired as opposed to something given to the community to decide for themselves.
yeah. But the problem is that our the Tanakh stops at the Chronicles, right? So it's just saying that that's what we're working off of, right? If we want to go inside the biblical text, if you wanted to go in something that was post, if you want to go post second century, then you would have to go to the rabbis that were considered to be the Tanaim, right? So
Correct.
that's the gap there.
So okay, that's the gap. So can you show us an example from the Chumash where the oral instructions are divinely inspired as opposed to a byproduct of the elders and leaders coming together to resolve a matter?
I mean, one example, one of the best examples would be Abraham, right? Like Abraham being told to leave, Haran, and eventually doing a circumcision, right? Like that was something God told him to do. God told him to remove, that the foreskin, right? And so how he was able to do that, it wasn't explicitly say grab the male reproductive organ and then take the bottom skin and peel it back and all these different things. These are things that were divinely inspired and given to Abraham that eventually became codified on Mount Sinai, because this is what Isaac did and Jacob did to all of his sons, and then on Mount Sinai it became codified for a nation. So the
All right,
circumcision is the
so
best example.
I got you. So you're saying that the instructions on how one performs circumcision, right, that actual process is divinely inspired. And what we find in the Talmud and from the sages is that they have preserved that method. Is that what you're saying? All the way
There you
back
go.
to the Iron Age period. Now, what if I told you that there are two articles that are written in the past 3 years that goes back to look at the ancient method of circumcision within the ancient Greece, and they have found some tools in the Judean province, in that strata, right, of time, that may showcase a misunderstanding from the rabbis and how it was actually performed? What if I shared that with you? Would you receive that information? Would you ignore or gloss over it? And the reason
I
why I say
think
that, Mordecai, real quick, this real quick, and thank you for bearing with me. The reason why I say it's because what I found is over 62 items that have corrected the rabbinic understanding based on archaeological finds. And please answer, and I'll be right back.
like I said, I mean, I'm sure there's tons of academic discourses and archaeology that they could find, but most of those things are designed to convince the children of Israel they're not who they are, right? So it's I mean, even if a person has a Jewish last name, right, and whatever, most of these people who write about this stuff, are atheists, right? Unless they're a rabbi and they've been certified that that what's been written about has been backed by other people, right? So that's it. So it's just like, okay, fine. I mean, like some other people from other nations want to say like, oh well, this whatever. For us, just to put it out there, the way that we understand circumcision, it didn't start with Abraham. I just use that as an example. To us, the idea of circumcision came when Adam and his wife had no flesh, right? They were celestial beings, right, living in this place called Gan Eden, right? And
Wait,
so
are you getting that from the Talmud, or are you getting that from a third party reading that you regard as sacred?
no. This all this is in all this is in the Talmud. All of our books of teaching, this is in, whether it's the
I,
Talmud, whether it's the Midrashim. Yeah, go ahead.
I can read that. Can you give me the tractate where that says that Adam and Eve were not, they were like spiritual beings and all of that? Where
That
can I
they're
read that?
celestial. Yeah, I have to look inside to get through the exact page in the exact tractate, but this is a widely accepted thing. And then they developed
Wait,
flesh, and
wait,
then they became, yeah.
mercy, 1 second, because I've read the Talmud and it says that Adam had intercourse with every animal in the garden. It says that. That is the rabbinical interpretation given. If he's a celestial being, he can't, first of all, he can't do that action as a celestial being. I believe both references are wrong. However, I'm using your source material as the foundation. And it says that Adam had intercourse with every animal in the garden, and that's how he knew that he was alone. I can find you that tractate. That's that's actually on
Yeah,
Safari.
I've read it, and there's a lot. It doesn't read. I mean, it doesn't read the way that that you're making it sound like he did bestiality, right? And
What is
that's not
the?
what
It says. It says the word. The word there translate. I didn't translate this.
it.
So the translatory choice of
Mhm.
Safaria.org is intercourse.
Yeah, I mean that is a I guess you could interpret that, but him knowing the animals had to do with more so him being able to connect on a very deep level to the essence of the animal, and he was able to give them names. So if somebody wants to
Hmm.
translate it that way, that's not the tradition. Anyways, but I want to just go back, just finish the point in the bris milah.
Well,
What I'm saying is,
that is the tradition. Like Safaria.org touts itself as the premier place to read the Talmud. It,
mm,
it,
but
tout-
the
it,
but the
tout- it
translations on Safari are really bad. They're
you
really really bad.
fair enough. I'll
Yeah.
let you have that. Go ahead, finish what you're saying.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that this idea that Adam and Eve were initially celestial beings, and what happened was is that they actually, if you want to look it up, you could look it up in the Midrash Rabbah Bereshit, right? So it talks about this, right? Literally the first. I have it right in front of me. That's I didn't even think about it right now. But the point is just saying that Adam and Eve were the celestial beings that didn't have any uh, physical skin as we have until they ate from the Eitz Hadas, right, from the tree of knowledge. When they ate from that, then they developed flesh. Then they became sinful, and then they became ashamed. I mean, not sinful. They became ashamed, and that's when they covered themselves, right? But before that, they didn't have skin that way. So the point is that the whole concept of that physical part of our body being covered in skin, needing a circumcision, right? Started with Adam, right? Because by the circumcision, we're returning back to the original man who did not have that extra skin over that part of the body. Now you could go even further, right? When the word for circumcision is called berit, a brit, right? Brit, right? So we learn that Brit, we use the same lotion, the same language to understand Brit as we do when Hashem says, Bereshis bara Elohim. In the beginning, God created. So this bara and berit is the same thing in terms of creation. This creation is a covenant, right? This bara is a covenant. So this dynamic of the bris milah that we do, with our sons on the eighth day, that dynamic is connecting the man to the original creation itself. Even before Adam, the purpose of creation was this dynamic of berit, right? It's a covenant. So the covenant that we have to protect ourselves from sexual impurity, sexual immorality, all the different things that we see in society that wants to ruin that part of the body for the man so he has no knowledge of God and he's basically becomes an animal. That dynamic is understood to be a mechanism to connect us to creation, the purpose of creation, and the light of creation. So that's
Oh, okay, okay. Thank you for sharing that. Divine Prospect, you back? All right, the brother is still away. He said he had some things he had to do. But this has been an interesting conversation. Sorry about that. I got a phone call. But this has been an interesting conversation once again. All right. The Israelites host a room that people of different ideologies could speak in uninterrupted with order. Nobody's being disrespected. And we don't have to play games. All right. You can kick your doctrine and we can just reason on it. There's no reason to pick a side and be unfair as far as moderation. We don't operate like that. So I hope everybody here joins the room at the top. Follow me and the different mods on stage. If you enjoy the information, hit my profile and fund the movement. Whatever you need to do, okay? Because we operate rooms like this every day. All those names you see on stage with a green mod badge, we all have different rooms and houses, and all of our rooms operate the same way. We have very interesting theological conversation. And y'all are all welcome to join us. All right. Um, with that being said, we got Leib on the stage. Leib, when Divine Prospect comes back, I do want him to finish his thought. But did you want to say something?
I wanted to say a couple of things, okay? You started way back maybe about 30 minutes ago, and it was talking about like the Zohar, okay? So I'm just sitting here reading a book here by Dr. Mark Shapiro, who holds the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Chair of Judaic Studies at the University of Scranton, Pennsylvania, graduate of Brandeis and Harvard University, okay? And so this book is talking about like, the halacha, if you have something and you want to go back and reattribute it. So, okay, if this was written like 1,000 years past the time of the events you're talking about, what is the way that that can be done? And so something that they bring up is actually talking about that book, the Zohar, and they're talking about a rabbi here by the name of Yaakov Emden or Jacob Emden. Okay, and they're talking about. I'll just read a little bit from the book. I won't do as much as Divine Prospect did, just like 2 or 3 sentences. Okay. Rabbi Emden refers to this liberal perspective on false attribution in discussing the authorship of the Zohar. As is well known, this book is attributed to the 2nd century sage Rav Simeon ben Yohai. However, Emden pointed to all sorts of problems with this attribution, at least with regard to most sections of the Zohar. And then it goes on a little bit more about, okay, if you know that this book was not written at the time that it's said, then how do you deal with it? Okay. So that's the first point. When people talk about like Kabbalah and it like the Zohar and things like that, it's been my experience that if somebody brings that person like a historical point about something, then they'll do a whole bunch of babbling and word salad, in order to get out of actually picking up a history book. I've had this discussion before about like Paleo Hebrew, which is what the Samaritan Torah is still written in, and thousands of years ago is what the Jewish Torah was written in, but through some accident of colonization, it changed over to the Assyrian script. Okay, rather than read about the accidents of colonization that made it such that that was the case, they'll do a whole bunch of like babbling all about divine spirits, divine essence, and it made this happen. And so, what he said here just a few bit earlier is not the first time I've heard this. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is in this very same book, it was talking about what you said about Adam. Okay, and I'll read a couple of sentences about that. It's on page 199. Another interesting text, which from the standpoint of sexual propriety is absolutely shocking, appears in Rashi's commentary on Bereshit 2:23. The verse states that after Eve was created, Adam said, "This time it is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." The Talmud quotes R. Eliezer on this verse. This teaches that Adam had intercourse, Shabbat Adam al, with every beast and animal, but found no satisfaction until he had intercourse with Shabbat al Eve.
Yeah, I
Okay.
recall. I recall reading that.
Okay. So what do you say?
I recall reading that. It definitely said
Oh,
intercourse.
oh, right. And
When
so
he tried to present it as the idea of no, as in have a connection with them, I don't recall reading that. I recall reading the translatory choice as intercourse. That's what I recall. Until he met
well, right.
Eve,
And so what?
he felt he was alone.
And when people do Kabbalah, okay, when people talk about Kabbalistic things, that's one of my disfavorite topics because they'll do a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo to talk up the fact that they aren't talking about anything, okay? So that's the second point. Now, I want to be brief, okay? So I'll just make the third point and then I'll land because I don't want to do a Mordecai and like babble for 30 minutes about nothing, okay?
But
So,
look at a black Jews. He'll come on a stage of
Now,
Hebrew
okay,
Israelites.
Mordecai,
But
you
now,
they're
talk, you
wait,
talk too
wait,
much.
don't fight,
Mordecai,
don't
you
so
talk
fight,
too much,
don't
jealous of
man.
fight,
me,
don't
so
fight, don't
jealous of
fight, don't
me,
fight, don't
so
fight, don't
jealous
fight,
of me. No, it's
don't
not
fight.
fight. So jealous
Just
of me that he doesn't even care
Mordecai,
about you guys. He doesn't even care
Mordecai.
about you guys. He just wants to come on here and try to talk me
All
down.
right,
You
all
are
right.
Uncle Tom.
All right, all right, but I can't let you go at him like
Get this
that
fool out
because
of
I was
here, man.
about to
He's
stop.
embarrassing.
Wait, because I was about to stop him from going at you. Leave.
Okay, leave him
Let's
alone.
not
I'll leave
make
him
it
alone. I'll
personal.
leave him alone, okay?
Wait,
You
leave.
ain't
Let me
nobody.
say
Don't
it
ride
so
your
everybody.
truck.
Mordecai, you're killing me because I'm actually trying to protect you and everybody. Whether you agree or disagree with Mordecai or not, Leib, you can't make it personal. That's what they was doing to me last room, even lying on me, calling me racist, putting words in my mouth, and nobody protected me. I consider that a strong betrayal for taking their stage and helping their room have viewership. Mordecai is taking the stage. He is answering the questions. He is allowing himself to be cross-examined. The least I could do is ask that you don't come at him like that. Can you do that, Leib?
Yes, I can, and
All right.
I'll wrap it up really quickly. Okay, so all of these topics that we're talking about, they come up at various points in this Shapiro book, which by the way is published Littman Library of Jewish Civilization. Professor Mark B. Shapiro, Changing the Immutable, and he's actually mostly dealing with like the last 500 years in Orthodox Judaism. Okay, so the upshot is that the fact that the Jewish civilization has changed over time, this is not mysterious. I mean, if you read carefully, you will see that okay, at the beginning it was a sacrificial religion, okay, and then after the first destruction, they had to develop all of the what do you say, the diaspora like laws because they were living in the diaspora, okay. Then after the destruction of the second temple, they had to develop more. So like if you read the story of Ruth's conversion, at that time it was an act of tribal affiliation, so it was enough for her to just like marry one of these people or just verbally declare it. But after the destruction of the second temple, it became a very different thing. We all know this, okay? So you can also talk about like you have all of these guys that go around and people wear black hats and they wear like the strimals and things like that. That didn't exist for all time, okay? That's something that started a few hundred years ago. So one half of Haredim are Hasidim now, but if you go back in time 300 years, they didn't exist. And one of the guys at my shul, he's like, "How did we get stuck with the Hasidim?" You know, so I mean, it's not, you don't have to like make all of these magical explanations to explain that there has been some change, because it has been a lot of change, and we know it because you can't go back and say, okay, oh, it's written here in the scripture where somebody had a strimel. Moshe Rabbeinu had on a strimel. We all know
We're
this,
not
and
even
in that.
discussing that. We're not even discussing that.
Okay, so in that way, the conservative Rabbi Abba, he probably was a little bit more honest when they say, okay, Judaism is an evolving civilization and so on and so on. But I mean, the upshot is talking about like the authorship of the Talmud, you know, you know, it's true. I mean, it's meant to apply to some circumstances in like a specific time. And the way that things like this are handled, okay, I guess I'm moving into a fourth point, is that when people don't want to deal with all of the historical events and things like that, then they'll say, okay, for purposes of convenience and purposes of neatness, then we'll treat the Talmud as if it was written at the same time as the written Torah, because it's convenient. Okay. And I'm also reading here in the same book, it says, okay, rabbis, nowhere are we're commanded to be a nation of priests and holy people. We're not commanded to be historians. And so that's actually the crux of
Who
this whole
cares
book that
about this rabbi you're reading? Who cares?
Well,
I
no,
know
it
more
Mordecai,
than
became
you
a
guys.
Mordecai,
I'm
Mordecai,
smarter than the
Mor-
person you're
Mordecai,
reading.
I know
I'm
Mordecai,
you are.
smarter.
Mordecai, you out of
I'm much
line.
smarter. And I'm
Mordecai,
smarter than you too.
Mordecai, you out. I just told the dude he got to talk to you the right way, and now you're coming at him with hostility, and he wasn't finished. You can't do that.
I'm looking through this book. I actually contacted the author. I'm looking through the bibliography of this book has 1,450 sources, and I had to contact the author myself and say, "How do you do something like this? Who has time to read 1,450 books? Are most of them books, or are most of them responsa, or what?" And he said he would estimate like probably half of them, about 750 or so, were responsa, and the other ones were long books. And it's so that's a different story altogether. But I'm underlining the point that Divine Prospect made, that is, things change over time. That's very, very true. And I'm actually just reading this, in a book about like the rewriting of history and how things get changed over time. I'll give you another example of how
Wait,
people like assume something to be true for convenience. Okay.
before you go to the next point, let's slow down now. You made a lot of statements. You now you have to allow yourself to be questioned about that. If the people on the stage have questions or the
Yeah,
audience,
I got questions.
so you have to submit to a couple questions.
Go ahead.
Mordecai, you can ask the questions as long as you're respectful.
Yeah, I'm disrespectful, but I'm just saying, Joe. I want you to see this dynamic,
Question.
that you understand the
Hold
difference.
on, Lee.
The
Hold on, Lee.
difference is that I'm talking to Joel, right? What I'm saying to you is that most of these people that call themselves Jewish that are black have inherent problems with their identity, and Judaism was a way to rectify that. So when they see me talking to you, when they see me as group, even though it seems like, oh, well, Mordecai's one way in this room and another way in this room, I'm me. I'm me, right? But these people out here, he don't care about talking to you guys. He don't care about African Americans. He don't care about our community. That's why I'm in here. I'm not in here to be the biblical wizard. I could be spending my time doing tons of things. I actually matter in the Jewish world, right? So in the Ashkenazi Jewish world. So I'm not sitting up here trying to make my way and be accepted in some shul and this whole thing.
Question.
No, no, no. I'm writing
Hold
and
on, Lee.
teaching.
Lee, hold up.
I'm writing and teaching. So my point is saying that our tradition is based off of a series of levels of understanding, one of which is the Sod, which is Kabbalah, right? This is central to, to just as much as I have to have my son bris milad at a certain age, in the same way that happens, the same way I have to accept Kabbalah as part of the truth of Judaism. So when you have these like crackerjack guys who never learned in yeshiva, never don't know how to learn one daf in the Gemara, and is sitting around reading books. I don't need to read a book. Okay, I go straight to the source myself, understand and articulate to other people because I actually know how to learn. I know how to learn, and so from that dynamic, these guys are jealous. So they want to compare. Oh, Mordecai doesn't know he's saying it, and I heard this from the Zohar. So if you heard it from the Zohar, why don't you go and speak against all the white people,
Let
all
me
the
ask.
Ashkenaz
Let me
who say
ask
the
you.
same thing? But he won't say nothing to them.
Let me
He
ask you.
won't
Let
say
me ask
nothing
you.
to them because
Let
he
me
looks
ask
up
you.
to them.
Mordecai, let
Mm.
me ask you. Why do you say that he doesn't care about black people? Why do you say that?
Because he does. He wants his kids to marry white people. That's his whole thing. right? So I'm
Damn.
saying to you, is
Hold
it
on.
saying like
Let me ask Leib. Can I
these
ask
people?
Leib about that? Because that's a heavy accusation. You can't just move past it. Leib. Why is he
Well, I mean,
saying that?
did we have questions about this text that we're talking about right now?
Answer
This is like deflecting.
answer the phone, clown.
No,
Answer
you
it.
Leib,
are the
Leib,
moderator here. Now, do you have a
Leib,
question? The
Leib,
moderator
Leib,
asked you a
Leib,
question. Do you have a
Leib,
question?
Leib. He had a lot of vitriol towards you coming on the stage, and you made your statements. You came at him a certain way. I kind of calmed it down, and when he came at you, I calmed it down. But now, both of you are making claims against each other that y'all both gonna have to answer for. This is claim one. Is he justified in what he's saying about your position on black people? Is that true about you?
I don't know any of the people in this room, and I don't. If I went to a room where it was like everybody was not black, I don't know any of them either. This is not a personal conversation. I'm just talking about a
Get
source
out of
that
here.
I
Stop
read.
stalking me. Stop following me
Joel,
around.
I
Nobody's
heard
talking
you
Get a
about
though.
you.
life.
Hey Joel. Hey Joel, point of moderation real quick. Can you hear me,
Go
Joel?
ahead, Adawan, take over.
No, no, I don't want to take over because I'm driving. I'm going to go in the matrix. Just to kind of unmuddy the waters because we were doing so good for so long, and I already know that once you give golden swords, it's going to get muddy. But we were doing good right now. We were in a good spot, right? So first of all, to Mordecai, right? The challenge that was on the table for you was to question what it is he was saying, to put him on the hot seat based on what he was just saying. That's what you need to do. The personal stuff you need to leave aside. Now, I'm going to say this, Mordecai. I'm going to say this in your defense. He has come in our rooms before, and pretty much in a nutshell, what you are saying is true. He was saying that he wants his children to marry within that community, and the majority of the community is white. So yes, he wants his children to marry, in essence, white people. Did he say white people
Damn.
outright? No, but
He
people
said
within
it
the community.
explicitly.
Well, pretty much he alluded to the same. I'm agreeing with you. He alluded to that in one of these rooms
Either
before, so
way,
you're not lying about that.
he doesn't
But,
represent. He's a
but with
guy.
that,
Go ahead.
I got it, Mordecai. I got it. We've spoken here before. He's been in our rooms before. I got it.
But I'm
I'm
saying, but these
agreeing with
guys are
you.
stalking me. They're stalking me online.
I
Anywhere
get
I'm
it.
at, they're
I
trying to
get it.
be there. They're trying to shoot me
I
down.
get
You know what I'm saying?
I get it. I get it. But we're here right now to have a conversation. There's a lot of people in the room, and y'all personal beefs that you guys
I
have in
don't have
other
any
rooms.
personal beef.
It's not
Just get off my nuts. Stop following
Mordecai.
me
You're being a
around.
little Mordecai. You're being a little emotional now. You were doing good. You were having a great conversation with
Of course,
Divine, a
I
great
was.
conversation with Joel. Right? Yeah. So we're trying to keep the same energy for the sake of the people in the room. I understand that you're upset about your interactions with him before, right? And you and him are gonna have to work it out. But I'm asking you for the sake of the room, if we can continue to have the conversation as we were having it. If you don't want to talk to him, I guess just tell Joel you don't want to talk to him, and then he can just address somebody else in the room, or we can move on. If you don't want to talk to him, just say that. Do you want to? Go
I
ahead,
would
go ahead.
address it like this. I would address it like this. What Divine Prospect was talking about was not. We agree that there was a oral explanations on how to apply certain halakha. That's not on the table. His issue, Divine Prospect's issue, is one thing. If there's another community that has a tradition and is also divinely inspired in their regard, is should they have to submit to another understanding or frame of reference with halakha? That's a fair argument. That's the argument people make here in Israel about the Yemenite Jews, about the Ethiopians. It's a big discourse, but he's not invalidating what we believe as Jews. He's not saying that, oh well, no, none of this exists. He's saying that there was an authoritarian position created during the times of Eleazar and Nehemiah, and he's now saying that, and he's saying from there that has been the consensus viewpoint that has been carried out post Babylon from Jews that were part of that Talmudic tradition and that transition that happened during the second century. So we all agree on that. There's no issue. I feel like it's a very fair question and argument to have, that if I have a certain tradition and I'm from Africa or somewhere else or some other part of the world, that should I have to relinquish that to a mainstream authority? That's fair. We're not talking about strimals. We're not talking about customs, and he's talking about a fundamental point that is a huge point of discussion here in Israel, which is when other groups come to the land and they build here in the land and they had other traditions. Should they have to do it? And you know what? And to be honest, the consistency in terms of the Ethiopian Jews, a lot of the rabbinical community says that they made a mistake with that. Is that that really actually really hurt that next generation, because once you remove the customs and the traditions that people were developing, that the yoke of the Torah changes for them, right? And so if they're not able to re-adapt, with many, which many Ethiopians have not here in Israel, the second generation, third generation, it's, you know, they're not keeping anything now, right? So
Hey,
that's
Mordecai, real
so
quick. Hey, Mordecai, real quick. Let me. 'Cause I want to kind of center the conversation because you missed out on some points that he made. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask him to restate one of his positions. He made a lot of claims. I'm going to ask him to restate one of the positions that he made concerning the Zohar, which you said is essential to Judaism. That's what you said, right? So he made a claim
there
about
is
the
no
Zohar.
Judaism
So
without it.
okay, fair enough. So he made a claim. So Leib, if you can just briefly reiterate your point about the Zohar. You said something about something being written like afterwards, 1,000 years, something like that. I really don't. I really want you to reframe it. Reframe your question or your point if you could, and then Mordecai, please speak directly to that point. If you could, Leib, please.
Okay, so I'll just reread the academic work. Okay, so Jacob Emden refers to this liberal perspective on false attribution in discussing the authorship of the Zohar. All right, and that's a whole text, by the way. As is well known, this book is attributed to the second century sage Rav Simeon ben Yohai. However, Rav Yaakov Emden from 400 years ago pointed to all sorts of problems with this attribution, at least with regard to most sections of the Zohar. How then should one understand the ascription to our Simeon ben Yohai? Emden suggests that since the kernel of the Zohar goes back to him, despite the fact that it was actually composed much later, our Simeon ben Yohai can still be regarded as the father of the work. Another approach offered by Emden is that the Zohar, or at least the majority of it, is simply a pseudo-epigraphical work written by someone in medieval times, but with the appearance of a much earlier book. In other words, it is a literary forgery.
All right, real quick, Mordecai, I'm gonna give you a chance to respond, but I want you to understand Leib's point before you respond, because I don't want you to respond with. And what he quoted was what these rabbis were doing is called textual criticism, right? They're actually looking at the text and what's written in the text, and based on what's written in the text, it's being attributed or being said to be attributed to one time, but the actual contents of the text is showing that it probably is a later writing. The same thing, Mordecai, is done with the actual Torah itself. You do realize that there are people, or there's academia that will date uh, the Book of Deuteronomy to the Assaherdan treaties. You do realize that, right? They don't put it with Moses. They put it in textual criticism, right? And so we, as Israelites or you as Jews that believe that Deuteronomy was given to Moses, have to respond to this textual criticism, and we cannot do it with emotion. He's doing the same thing with your Zohar. All that is textual criticism. So now the responsibility is on you to show that it actually comes from the floor is yours.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, on that point, this is like an old argument that people say that no, Rabbi. First of all, say his name correctly, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay, that's how we say it in Hebrew. So the people have been saying this for like people who are like Reform Jews and some literalists that are Orthodox, whatever, people who want to learn things from a very literal perspective, have argued against the Zohar and its authenticity. And then some people say no, it wasn't. Rabbi Shimon did write the Zohar. Everyone agrees he wrote the Zohar, but you know, they lost the Zohar. It wasn't so clear. And then Moshe Diliron, you know, a rabbi, you know, who was in the medieval times, you know, he found it, or his wife found it after he died, and that's the Zohar that people are saying today, and these type of things. But all that doesn't. It's none of it substantiated, right? Because all of our everyone agrees that Rabbi Shimon wrote the Zohar. Everyone agrees.
Not
This is the
everybody, and
same
this
rabbi.
text is 400 years old. The text is 400 years old. Look up Yaakov Emden.
Who cares?
Look, he's a rabbi in
Why do you put?
in the
Why are you
tradition.
putting who? Who is he?
Okay, I'm not going to do your Google
Who is
research
he?
for you. Okay, so I
Who
said,
is he in the Jewish world? Who is Jacob Linden in the Jewish world? Tell
so
me, who is
he's
he?
a German rabbi from about 4 centuries ago. Okay, and
Okay,
he did a
who
lot of
is
work.
he in? Who is he in the Jewish community? Who is he? Do we learn his text? Does he have
Yeah,
authority?
but see, that's you can't, Mordecai. You can't argue points like that though. Just to say, because you have a certain worldview and people that you align with have a certain worldview because you guys don't recognize him doesn't invalidate the work or the questions. You have to invalidate that by going and point for point, showing why he is wrong, not just saying who is it. Do you understand what I'm saying to you, Mordecai? That's not really a
Eh,
sufficient answer, especially somebody that's formally educated. That's not a sufficient. I know you know that.
okay. But priest, on that point, then we could say that any book that anybody writes, that someone I wrote a book, right? So anybody who writes a book, right, could say, "Oh, well, I don't believe this," and because they have a position and they're quote unquote Jewish, that should have some authority. No, it should have a basis. No
No,
one's.
it's not what. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, but we have to answer the questions. I'm not saying because they have a Jewish last name we have to accept it, but you have to rise to the challenge and show why the point that's being made is wrong. The same thing goes on with the Torah,
Absolutely.
Mordecai. The same thing goes on. The same
Absolutely.
thing goes on with the Tanakh, Mordecai. The same thing goes on with all the entire Old Testament, right? The Ketuvim, it's the Ketuvim. It goes on with all that stuff. There's textual criticism saying, well, did Jeremiah write this? Did Isaiah write this at this time? The book of Daniel, this is right, this is wrong, this is an interpolation. The same thing goes on with the book of Josephus, right? They say that
Yep.
Josephus wrote a certain amount of that book, and they also say that there's later Christian interpolations. This is called textual criticism, right? Those of us that believe in the Torah, right? We have to rise to the occasion, not just say, well, who are you to say that? So what we're saying is that we personally, this is our belief, myself, Yahweh all, Shawapar, and all the brothers in the Israelite community, when people, somebody got to go on mute for a second. When
Sorry,
people
that's me.
ask us, yeah, and Divine Prospect as well, when people ask us questions about our Torah, we have to rise to the occasion and answer the question. If we don't have the answers, then we have to go back and study. We get asked questions about textual criticism all the time, especially about the book of Deuteronomy, as I just mentioned, because the book of Deuteronomy is said by scholars, by academia, to have been written during the Persian period. That's what they say, right? I can't just say, well, who are you to say that? I have to go in and study that argument so I can answer the question. And what I'm saying to you is, and I'll give you back the floor right now. What I'm saying to you is, I hear what you're saying, and you're speaking from a place of passion. You're speaking from a place of defense of your beliefs and the books that you hold sacred. I get it, right? But I'm gonna be a little rough with you right now. Your answer is not sufficient in terms of edifying right now. Let's see how many people are in this room. Right now, there are 335 people in this room that don't have an answer to his question as to the Zohar being written later than you say, outside of you asking, well, who the hell is he to say that? That's what I'm saying to you. If you
Okay,
want to
fair.
leave,
That's fair.
that's fine. You got it. You got it. You got it, Morgan.
Yeah, you fair. That's fair. That's good. That's good teaching. I appreciate that. So on the point of the Zohar, the in order for there to actually be a debate on this whole thing, there's either two, I don't. The basis of his position is what? Is he saying that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did not write the Zohar because we have a complete a succession of link of teachers that came from that eventually created all types of movements based off of the Zohar, right? So I'm saying, like, so is he saying that the Zohar never existed, or is he saying that someone's saying that the Zohar existed but then it lost later, and then Moshe Diliron, allegedly had it in the in the Middle Ages or whatever, and is he going off of that, or is he just reading a book without having any understanding of the Zohar or the what it is or its dissemination or the arguments that people have against it, and he's just reading this alleged rabbi that Yaakov Lemon. Now I have heard his name, but I think I know someone with the same exact name personally. But the point is just saying that, so what is his argument exactly? Like, I mean, he's just reading a book. Like, I mean, if he wants to talk about the Zohar and the Masur of the Zohar and how it came into it, we could talk about that, right? Because Rabbi Shimon is a student of Rabbi Akiva, right? So it's just saying, like, it's not like this isn't a sneaky thing. Like, it's not an undercover thing. This is an explicit part of our tradition. So if he's saying something against the Zohar, he should, if he's truly trying to come and bring wisdom to this conversation, he should be able to explain to me the mechanism of the Zohar and what his argument actually is, or he read something in the book because he doesn't really know how to learn, and so he's reading some English book, and so he hears me talking about the Zohar, talking to my brothers about the Zohar, and talking about our perspective, whether they accept it or not. And so from there, he wants to come and shoot me down. Right, so he needs to explain to me what is his understanding of the Zohar, and why are they saying? Why is Jacob Linden saying what he's saying? You have to explain that to me.
He's not the only one, and Jacob Indem has been dead for a few hundred years, so I'm not going to be asking him much of anything. But it's a whole series of scholars that not other than that, okay, because this book is not specifically about the falsity or the fact that the Zohar was like a pseudo epigraphical. Let's use that nice word again. That's a different issue. But I mean, the moderators of the room said you were supposed to bring something. You don't answer a question with a question. At least
I'm
not I
asking
was
you a
kind of
question.
told.
What are we talking about? You read a passage from a book from someone who said that it was written later. So I'm asking you, what is the basis of that? Are you saying the Zohar was never written at all? Are you saying that it was written and someone rewrote it? You just read a verse saying that it was written later. What does that
I
mean?
didn't
What is
read
the
a verse. I
basis of
read
it?
out of a sefer. And by the way, I did go to the Kollel here in Detroit, and I asked them what they thought about this book. I asked Rabbi
Why don't you go to the Kollel and be a
Shmuel
part of
Iron.
it? Go to Kollel and be a part of
The
it.
Kol.
Why don't they ask you questions?
Okay, no, so I asked Rabbi Shmuel Irons over at the Lakewood Kollel here in the city of Jewish Detroit in Oak Park, Michigan. And I said, okay, what do you know about this scholar? What do you think about these sources? And he said he had no problem with the book. So I'm taking what the scholar Rabbi Dr. Shapiro says. I'm taking it as read. And the fact is,
Okay.
it's
So the difference between me and you, I only learn directly from the source, and if I need clarification on the text, I will consult with colleagues to do that. I don't go to a rabbi and say, "Hey, rabbi, is this okay for me to learn? Does this make sense? Is this
that,
valid?" That's something I did when I was going through conversion, right?
that's not my
I'm talking
question.
about
That's
now.
not what I did. That's not what I did. It was other questions.
Okay, so you don't even know what the Zohar is yourself.
Okay, so
You don't
guys,
know
you
anything
get
about
go
it
ahead. Seth. You
yourself.
act like okay. So can we move to another question? Moderators.
No. We're going to stay here.
All
Tell
right, all
me,
right, all right, all
what
right,
is
all
the
right, all right,
argument that
all
he's
right,
making in the book?
all right,
What
Mordecai.
is the argument he's making in the book? Tell me. Help me understand the argument.
Mordecai. I understand your question, and I'm a fierce debater, and I understand where you're at in your conversation, and I know you want an answer to that. So I'm not gonna block you from getting an answer from that. First, to keep order, you got to chill out, fam. You're getting way too hype. I want you to answer Mordecai's question, and I want this conversation to continue. I don't want you guys to abandon it. So, Mordecai, your question is fair. Just chill out. Leib, I still have questions for you concerning some things that Mordecai said earlier, still. But again, I would act the same way. If you came to me and said, well, Bart Ehrman said he's an atheist and there's nothing in your Bible that proves that God exists and he studied the entire Bible, I could ask you the same question. Who the hell is Bart Ehrman? Yeah, I know who he is, but who is he? His opinion doesn't make or break what I believe in. That's kind of the same thing he's saying to you. So it is fair what he's saying to you. So let's calm it down. Mordecai, ask that question academically. Chill out. You getting mad. Don't get mad. Just ask the
All right, fine.
question.
I apologize. It's not directed. It's a whole bunch of negativity I've had to deal with. So I'm gonna remove that and focus on academia. My point is, I need him to explain to me, what is the statement that's being made in the book about the Zohar? And the reason why I'm asking that, I'm trying to see if he truly was trying to come to this conversation to bring truth, or was it a way to just shoot down what I'm saying, talking to you guys? So please explain to me, if you have knowledge about what you're talking about what is the argument that's being made in the book, and I will gladly respond to it.
Well,
Hey,
you don't have a book.
Salakia, Mordecai. Are you implying that the brother just wants to embarrass you in front of
That's it.
us?
That's
That he
it.
doesn't really have an
That's it.
argument?
That's it. To make a nigga look bad. That's it. He don't represent me. He don't know what he talking about.
Look, as far as making you look like bad or unacademic, I don't have to do any help with that. Okay, I was just reading something from a well-sourced book. Okay,
What
and
is
it's
the
within the
argument,
context of
idiot? What is the argument?
it. Oh, guys, you see that? Okay, so it's actually a subsection of the last chapter about false attribution, and so the Zohar was an example of false attribution.
What is the argument he's making in the book? Let's discuss it. What is the argument?
I've read it for you 2 times already. I don't know.
No,
A
you did
third
not read it.
repetition
You
is not
just
going to be
told me that he
helpful.
said it was written later than what it said it was. So what is the basis of that argument?
Do you want me to read this a
Yeah,
third
that's a
time?
good question. Leave. That's a fair question. It's not fair that he called you an idiot. Mordecai, chill out. That's a fair question, Leib. What was the conversation around of why he said that? What is his proof of why he comes to that conclusion in this text?
Okay. Well, this goes on for like about 9 pages and about 40 sources. So can I just give you like the say the first paragraph and let that so give you the
Whatever you
idea?
feel best represents your argument.
Okay, false attribution is another genre where a number of Talmudic sages and later rabbinic authorities saw mendacity as justified in the name of a larger concern. Okay, and that's cited in Magan Avraham on Cairo and the Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim section. Okay, 156. The decision as to whether this larger concern should be acted upon was a prerogative of the community of scholars, as the masses were never given this leeway. This type of falsehood is not acceptable in contemporary society. Undoubtedly, many modern readers are thus bound to feel quite troubled when seeing how a value that they take to be sacrosanct was not regarded as such by at least some great rabbinic figures. Okay. So the point of this subsection of the chapter is that, if you wanted to like make a source and it was written way after the events happened, such as with the Zohar, there are halakhic reasons that you can come up with to say it if it is in service of a higher goal. And that's the purpose of the last whole chapter of the book. And it was special. The Zohar was a specific thing. So with respect to the conversation that we were having earlier, I've had this conversation with other people when somebody brings up some historical events, such as what Divine Prospect brought up, talking about an explanation of how the Talmud came to be such as it is today. And he says, okay, it's historical circumstances. Then when people haven't taken the trouble to read these $200 academic books, then the default position is to go to the Zohar and use like a bunch of really flowery words. But it's no point because I'm saying that it was, the evidence shows it was written like many years after the actual events of the Talmud. And it's plenty of people have been talking about this for several hundred years. This is not me. This is way before Reform. This is at least 200 years before Reform. So, I'm willing to take these rabbis at their word, such as Rabbi Emden, okay, or such as Rabbi Shmuel Irons, who says that he thinks the book is okay. And if they say that the Zohar is, pseudo epigraphical, okay, it does make sense. So it's fine. If somebody says that the
Why does it
Talmud
make
has like,
sense? Why does it make sense?
well, because when you talk to people and they don't have arguments, then their first thing is,
I'm asking
the
you a
paleo
question.
liberality
Why
is,
does it make sense that the Zohar is not authentic?
well, because lots of scholars have come to that conclusion for hundreds of years.
Okay, so
But it
so
doesn't matter if it was
okay,
historically
so
true.
the people.
Okay, but if it was done for a good purpose, then the halakha can be made to support its usage, even if
Okay,
it's not historically
so
accurate.
Lev, what you've demonstrated is you really don't have a position. You're just reading a book and utilizing that to shoot down what I'm saying. So this is the argument that's being made,
Okay,
right?
so this
Because you don't
argument,
have
okay, you get like
information.
really
You've
emotional
never
and bitter. So
learned.
let's talk
You've
about
never
something different.
learned.
Let's talk about something different, okay?
No, no,
Because
no, no.
he's missing the
No.
point.
You're gonna get spanked.
You're
I'm gonna
not a
spank
moderator.
now.
You're not
I'm
a
gonna
moderator,
spank.
okay? So the
I'm gonna
second point, the
spank.
second observation, the second
No, 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 no,
observation
no.
I
You're
made
getting
Leave,
was,
spanked
leave,
now. You're
leave,
getting
leave,
spanked now. We're gonna
leave,
go into what
leave.
the argument is.
You gotta let him respond to what you brought forward. That's what we doing. Hold up.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mordecai.
Okay. Yeah. So the argument that he doesn't even know what he's talking about is that with this particular Rabbi Yaakov Lenin, there is an
Emden. Look up
idea
Emden.
that there was bro. You can't even say Rabbi Shimon's name right. Okay. So the point is saying that there's an argument that's made by this rabbi. I don't even know his name, and I don't care, that says that, hey, you know what, we have some information that the Zohar actually that we have today was something that this man named Moshe Dilron, I don't know where he was at, in Europe or somewhere, I don't know, Italy, I don't know where it was, but he
He was a
had
Sephardic Kabbalist.
he had the Zohar, and his wife or somebody like that said that he actually wrote it, in or he added stuff to it or something like that, some argument, whatever, blah blah blah, and allegedly his copies or something with his copies became popularized or something, I don't know, but the
You
mainstream,
even don't
the
know. You didn't hear me
pervasive.
say any of that. You didn't hear me say any of that. So you don't know. So we
I
can
know
agree
you
on
didn't,
this.
because
So
you
let's
don't know the
agree to agree.
argument, because you don't know the argument. That's
Okay,
why
so
you're
now
just
we
reading
we're on the
books.
same page.
No, 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 no. I do know the argument, son. Okay, because I teach the argument.
Okay,
So
okay.
the
So
issue is
those
over
you
here.
can't do. Okay, we heard about that before. Okay, and so the second point I'm making, because he's
But
clearly
quiet,
like
quiet,
building.
quiet, quiet. Go and ask your rabbi if you could talk.
No,
So
no,
my
Leave.
point is,
You can't do that, Leave. You gotta let him finish his
this guy's a
presentation.
clown, man.
All
Anyways,
right,
the
Chill,
come
point
on.
is just saying.
Okay,
chill, chill,
so here we go with the name
chill,
calling again.
Mordecai.
If you heard the
Leave,
argument, you
leave,
don't have to
leave. See,
call names.
cause look, that's what
Well,
he
anyway,
do.
so the
Leave.
argument, so this is the argument that was pervasively pushed around by certain movements inside the Jewish world that did not like what the Zohar was bringing to the table. And then they also felt that the Zohar was linked to some people going into places of heresy, right? You had people like Shabtai Tzvi, you had people, that were against the Ramchal, all types of people, right? But everything that you see in mainstream Judaism today, whether it's the Hasidim, the Chabad movement, all of these things are all based off of the teachings of the Zohar, the teachings of the Ari, who expound on the Zohar 500 years ago. I mean, these are like humongous people. Everything that we do today in the Jewish world is directly a result of perspectives that were given in the Zohar, later explained by Rabbi Isaac Luria 500 years ago in Tzfat, right? And then so even today, the Balatanya, all these people, all these books, all these things were written based off that. So if somebody wants to come along, and this is why it's a joke, if somebody wants to come along and say, "Oh, well, I read a book and said the Zohar doesn't really exist," okay, fine, but you just threw out everything. You threw out how we understand halacha, how we understand hashkafa, how we understand like just whole traditions that are based around a mystical interpretation, as we say, mystical interpretation of the Torah. So it's not me. You're saying that Avadia Yosef, right? You're saying he was completely wrong. You're saying Rabbi Chaim Kanetsky was wrong. You're saying that Rav Kook. I mean, anybody you could name of any significance in the world of our Torah transition. You're saying all of these people were wrong, right? And you're
That's
saying
not
all
what
of
I
their
said.
that's exactly what you're saying, and that's what and that's why if I wanted to expose you, I could. Okay, but I don't. I'm not into that, right? Because you sat up here and you sat in front of a bunch of people who don't know about the Zohar, and you came up here with some fake ass information and wanted to dissuade them for understanding. And I'm just teaching what our
Okay, so
tradition is.
the book is a figment of my imagination. Okay, so
No,
you
no,
finish
no.
preaching your sermon yet? You
What
finish
I'm
preaching
saying
your
is
sermon?
your intellectual level is bringing a book and arguing a point that you don't even understand. You cannot explain. You don't even
Okay, so
know. You don't
a
even
book
know
is a
that you
bad
can't even say the
intellectual thing.
author's name correctly.
Look, okay, look, this book, okay, the book by these authors that I talked about, it'll be in print more longer than this 1,000 copy book that you sold or that you wrote. So I mean, if you ask somebody in the kollel, hey, have
Look
you
at this
heard of
guy.
this
Look at
guy?
this
The
guy's
answer is no.
jealousy. Look at this guy's jealousy. This
I'm
guy's
not
jealousy
jealous of.
talking about my
Okay,
book.
okay, guys. Okay, so can we move on? Moderators, if you want to like clarify
Hello?
the question. Moderators, if you want to
I
clarify
was,
the
I was,
question.
I was,
Bro, this guy
I
shouldn't
was
even be here.
enjoying this. I was
Morning, Carlo.
enjoying this
This guy
build.
shouldn't even. This guy shouldn't even be here. This guy's only up here to distract the conversation that we were building on. Right, that we had an amazing day of conversation about this whole time. So this guy is here is a mole, right? And he's
Mm,
just coming up here to come and create conflict to upset me, so we
mm.
cannot progress this
You're the only one
conversation.
that's doing the screaming. You're the only one that's
Bro,
screaming. You
you're
got
not
Hey,
even a
Leave,
part of this.
Leave,
You're
Leave,
not a
Leave,
part of this.
Leave. Do you believe that black people in America are Israelites?
I don't understand the question. I mean, and that's
Huh? That's an easy question. Do you believe that black people in America are Israelites?
what based on genetic evidence.
I'm just asking, do you believe that?
I don't think so. And
You can say no.
I don't think so. I go with the genetic evidence. And so that's what I go with.
And you believe that the people that are in the land today, you believe they are actually genetic descendants of Jacob.
Not exactly.
Who do you believe are genetic descendants of Jacob?
It's like a false binary question. You can have some people that exist in some population somewhere, and through enough time marrying other people, they'll just turn into something a little bit different. So I would say that the people that are there in Israel right now are like have like genetic ancestry that's related to like people a long time ago. But over the course of these last several thousand years, if you pick up enough like different ancestry, then you slowly turn into something a little bit different.
And so you don't believe that So-called black people. You don't believe they're
That was
Hamites.
absolutely stupid.
I know. You don't believe that so-called black people in America. You don't believe they're Hamites, do you?
No,
So where do the people, the descendants of slaves, where would you say they fall into biblical lineage?
I would not use biblical lineage to describe them because a molecular genetics textbook can do better.
So you don't have a spiritual view, a lens? You're not taught one?
Well, I mean, for spiritual lens is useful for what it's useful for. But if you want to talk about like the migration of populations from one place to another, better you ask a molecular geneticist or a population geneticist.
So it's safe to say you have no opinion. You don't know.
Okay, yeah, I'm agnostic. Let's put it that way. I'm agnostic on that point.
Okay, but the people that live in the land now, you're sure that they are most likely related to Jacob.
I'm saying that at some distant point. I mean, there's been a lot of mixing in from other populations. So if you wanted, like, the cleanest bloodline from thousands of years ago, you're not going to find it.
I didn't ask that. I'm saying you saying the people that live in the land now, they are most likely genetic descendants of Jacob.
Not only in the land of Israel,
It's
there's many places. Some of them you lived in Yemen at one point. Some of them lived in Azerbaijan. Some of them live in Jerba. It's lots of people spread out everywhere.
and the black people of America today, you have no idea what family line they fall under. You have no
I
idea.
don't treat the origin of blacks in the United States as a biblical issue. I treat it as a genetic issue. And what I believe from the sources that I read is that we are Klein, CLINE, which is where you have two races of people get together who have children, and then they have children with each other, and they become a new race in their own right.
So you believe black people in America are a new race,
They're a race in their own right.
which would be a new race,
But I mean, okay,
something
if,
new.
if you believe that, you can go backwards and say there was a time before which Ashkenazi Jews did not exist, like say 1,000, 1,100 years ago. If you went back in time 1,000 years ago, you could say that they were at that time a new race. But if you give enough time, then they'll turn into something, or they have turned into something in their own right. So
What
I don't think
what
blacks.
makes
I don't
one
think blacks are new.
what makes one an Israelite?
Ah, I guess some people say self-definition. Some people try to go with biblical definitions, but that's not helpful to me because I can't see it under a microscope.
Well, biblically speaking, what makes one an Israelite?
I just said I can't use biblical explanations to say why that is.
Really, the Bible doesn't tell you. You don't have a viewpoint on what the Bible says who an Israelite is.
What I say is this: if you look in a lot of
Is that a hard wait? Is that a am I asking him kind of a tough question?
okay,
Nah.
who the Bible says Israelites are. Okay, let me get directly back to that question. What I'm saying is people can take a definition of being Israelites, and if they write enough books and they have enough sources to say
No,
that
I'm
they
not
are,
asking what
then
people
that
do.
becomes
Listen,
real.
I'm not asking what people do. I'm asking what from the school of thought you come from. What does the Torah say an Israelite is?
I'd have to look it up.
That's important. I find it for all the knowledge in the world, not to have that at your fingertips is tough for me to.
No, I don't have it at my fingertips
You know what
because
I'm
it's not
saying?
useful. I mean, it's not useful in the world that I live in every day.
So, in your lens of Bible, of Torah and Tanakh, it is not important to be an Israelite.
What I understand the Israelite to be is a tribal lineage. And so what I understand is that after the destruction of the second temple, that who is a Jew became something different. From the time of the destruction of the second base of Mikdash, the question went from being who is an Israelite to who is a Jew. Two different things.
It did. Can you tell me where that question began in the Torah? The origin of that question
Okay, and
or the change of that question?
so I read that question not in the Torah. I read it in two sources. One of them was Paul Johnson, The History of the Jews, and he's talking about the times after
No,
the destruction of the second temple.
I said in the Torah. I'm not asking you what people think. I'm asking you what the Bible says in your opinion. So the Bible is the subject matter, the Torah. For you, I would assume the Old Testament. So even though there are many Jews that, even though they don't believe that Christ is the Messiah, they acknowledge that he existed. That's also a part of academia. But let's not make it complicated. According to the way you're instructed, is it important to be an Israelite according to the law and the prophets?
It depends on who makes the law.
Wow. Okay. Hey guys, I don't know how else to ask it,
Hey,
but
y'all
I
not
ask you to
gonna get
ask that.
nowhere with this dude.
Yeah.
You really. I mean, if he was around Jewish people, I guarantee his answers would be more assertive.
All right.
His answers would be more would be matter of fact. You guys are just like Mordecai. Mordecai up here acting like he black today. He's white
Yeah.
too, both of them.
Try to hold character
You know what I mean,
captive
I've
too,
been as
DJ.
assertive as I can possibly be. I mean, even for somebody like me, I'm variably Jewish depending on what synagogue I go into and what gabbai happens to run the minyan. So, I mean, if I take a position, I don't need to die on the hill. Who is a Jew? Who is not? Who is an Israelite? Who is not? Because if I said I have an opinion either one way or another, it's not like I could walk into some synagogue or some organization like Agudath Israel and say, okay, I believe this and it's real because I have sources A, B, and C and make a change one way or the other. So
Why
my goal.
why is it important what the people in the synagogue say?
Well, because that's the community of people I live around. Number one. Number two is where I send my kids to school. So I can't like be a rebel and say, well, I believe this thing, and it gets me all on the wrong side of all these people that I lived around. It's not really important whether it's literally true or not, because even if it is one way or the other, you can't prove it. Or not, you can't prove it. You can't make it useful in service of trying to get your kids into school. Let's say.
What? I don't understand that answer.
Okay, so
Somebody please flip that.
I mean, okay, if you say you take a position on something one way or
Yo,
another.
hey yo, King Ben, can you clip things in this room? When I make a room like this, can you clip things?
Yeah, the replays is on, so you good. This we need this on record. Everything that was said today is on record.
Nothing I said
Bro,
was
Mordecai was
offensive, and
going hard.
everything is something I
Mordecai don't
read.
like you. Mordecai don't like you, Leib. He said I pick up from the vibes from Mordecai that you some type of sellout. That's Mordecai's attitude.
Okay, and so I don't know what does it mean to be a sellout. I mean, okay, as for me, I have like a house full of kids that are at least 42% black, and I pay for everything that they eat at all of their
42%?
schooling. Yeah, I had a
What
DNA
is
test, but the point is, okay,
yo? What?
if you have a
What you
guy
mean
who
by
has
that?
like
What you mean?
10
Wait,
kids,
leave. Slow down, leave. What you mean 42%?
I gave them all genetic tests, and that's what it came back as.
Yo, that math ain't mathing, bro.
Your child. So according to the Torah, your children are not what you are.
Torah has nothing to say about this. My kids are Jewish for religious purposes, but for genetic purposes, they are like 49% Han Chinese, 42% black, and 9% white.
Damn, they not even 50% black. They not black.
Well, no, most black
See, because
Americans, like 90% of black Americans have something like 17% of like European ancestry.
Show us where you getting these numbers from, please, brother.
In the last book that I read here,
I disagree with the idea that all black people have European ancestry at some
okay,
point because all black people
the,
a part of the slave trade were not raped and all the people that were raped did not have
so
children. So
the
I
book that I
reject that
read, you want the
idea.
book? I'll give you the reference. It was called Black
Especially in
Men
the
and White
Caribbean.
Women by
Hey,
Martha Hodes, and it was
would you say,
Hello,
Divine?
my name is Eric. Nice to meet
Your
you
name is
guys.
out of the room.
okay, and so the book was
Crazy.
called Black Men, White Women, and it was about interracial marriages in the United States from the time of like the 17th century. And she was studying legal cases. And so she's like, okay, the first interracial marriage with a black guy and a white lady was such and such a time. And these are the court documents that show it. So in this book, it came up incidentally that it was a lot of interracial marriages in the United States. Not all the mixed blood was because of like the slave system. A lot of it was voluntary marriages. And it is even today.
Yeah, but according to the biblical narrative, there's 12 tribes, not 13, right?
But okay,
The reason there's that wait, can we say this? Hold on, Lee. I'm talking to you. So I would say, how come there are not 13 tribes? Because all 13 children of Jacob are Israelites, all 13 of them, right? But the sister doesn't have a tribe. Only the men have tribes, but none of the men married Israelite women because there were none to choose from because they were the beginning of the Israelites. Using that, I can deduce that the Bible is teaching that the father of the child determines the nationality of the child. Is that fair to say, Leib?
that's true before the destruction of the second temple.
Oh, so when the temple got destroyed, that
Uh,
stopped being true?
You get ready to put me on the spot here. What I'll say is that the status of a Jewish person from that time was established through a conversion process and not through tribal lineage.
Mordecai, do you agree?
That's the way.
Well, I mean, it's written in the book, so
Um,
he might not believe
That's
it.
tough.
what did you say, Devon?
No, I say he's probably on a journey. He's distant. He's sleeping. He's not hearing. I don't know what's going on there.
No, no. What did you
Yo,
did
that
you
was
like sleep
funny
over
as hell. He said
there?
he quoted Elijah, man. Whoever
That was
said
an
that.
undertone, but yeah, okay, yeah. So leave.
Wow.
Have you looked at any peer review articles on NCBI to kind of gauge a consensus on the mean ascensory proportion of African Americans that exists on this hemisphere and the diaspora?
I read something like about 5 years ago, "Who We Are and How We
Hmm.
Got Here" by Robert Reich. But what you said to point back to a peer-reviewed paper, I
Hmm.
can't point to that paper. But what I can say is that book and like one other, what is it called? "Making Sense of Race" by Edward Dutton. They said that they treated like Black Americans as people with like some fraction, some non-significant fraction of European ancestry.
Yeah, so
But
I
as
don't, I
technically
don't.
as you said,
Yeah, and that's also dependent on the location, right? So we see less genetic variation in the genetics of diasporing quote unquote Africans. That's what they call it in academia in the Caribbean than we do those who are native to or brought over here and natively have genealogy in what we call North America, right? And the
that
reason
makes
for
sense.
that is, yeah, the reason of that is how slavery was handled, right? So you had breeding post, right? Mostly in the Caribbean, the Europeans that came over here, that was not like something that they took advantage of, which is like raping like the slave women and stuff like that to create that type of admixture, right? That would eventually enter into their DNA. But as opposed to here in the States, because there was more variation of other groups here, like Native Americans and other European cultures, and just those who created the colonies, they were a little bit more liberal in how they handled their slaves, right? And they applied different methods of what we call some of the European men raping the women to produce children. But the reason why that wasn't as prominent as we think is because that actually weakens the mean strength of that slave performing laborious duties on the outside. Typically, those who would come from that hybrid lineage would be those who worked on the inside. And as you know anything about slavery, they sourced slaves from different regions based on their skill set. So some were better cultivators of tobacco and rice. Some were better as artisans. Some were better as indoor helpers, right, and assistants, right. So there's a large kind of window to look at in regards to seeing this. But ultimately, the consensus currently, based on genetic sites that are reported in DNA, is that those in the, like, for example, we take 23andMe, for example, they report that African Americans have descendancy that has what we call 73% Black. And I think there's a deviation of about 1 to 3%. But it's saying the consensus based on what's reported from the site is 73%. And I could drop that link in the chat and everybody can take a look at that. And that other admixture is what you're mentioning, but that does not mean that everybody in North America has admixture. Like, people think that. They think like these European slave masters were just raping everybody left and right, and like you didn't have any slaves. No, they had breeding posts for that. So they would take the woman who was the most procreative and they would take her and get what they called the stud males, and they would let them have sex. Why? Because that's maintaining the gene pool, producing an offspring that could do more laborious work. And that child would be epigenetically trained to be subservient to the slave master, right? By proxy of not having a father figure, since a lot of these male studs were used to impregnate those women and then removed out of the life of the child, right? So therefore, you don't have any example of a strong Black male that they physically would be strong, but mentally they'll see the slave master as their father, right? As a tutor, as a what's the word I'm looking for? As a overseer almost. You know what I'm saying? Somebody that's caring for their needs and supplying their needs based on what they give in return, which is their laborious work. So I was just saying that just to give some little bit insight in the picture, and then I'll drop that link in the chat, and you can definitely take a look at it, right? Analyze it or
Salakia,
whatever. But I think it's important to know like what the actual
Salakia,
figures say.
Divine. So to break it down into layman's terms, if the NBA had a chance, they'll breed LeBron because just because it's physical and natural
There you
talent,
go.
all his
That's it. And
attributes.
again, it all depend on what type of work that slave master has sourced that slave for. right? So if it's something artesian based or something that requires cultivation of the land, or if it's something that requires like building something, masonry type of work or whatever, then those males, guess what? And those women who are out there doing that, you're not going to rape them because you're going to denigrate the gene pool of where they come from to do that type of work. They believe that the more white blood that was in them, the less likely they were to be submissive to a white slave master, because they would be thinking themselves as more independent and so forth. So you wouldn't do that with slaves that's out in the field, which the majority of slaves were. You typically did that to those slaves that was confined to the inside, so artesian work, or those who was servants in the house and stuff like that, which were both male and female. And matter of fact, you would use those slaves to oversee the other slaves as well, right? Because you want to give those slaves on the outside a false pretense that someday they may make it inside, like the coon that they're using to subjugate them to master's work. You know what I'm saying? So this is just some good insight for people to know, like if you're really interested in the subject matter, and people to think that all this, like, we was all raped, so all of us got white European DNA. That's a fallacy, and I don't think that the
I agree.
consensus proves that.
I agree. I think people have to stop saying that in the age of information. We got to let that trope go. That's a trope, if there ever was one. We got to let that one go. You agree now, Leib? You can see where we're coming from, right, Leib?
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing, but okay. So take everything the divine prospect said is read.
What do you mean by that?
Assume that it's correct.
Yeah, I just put the
Oh my God.
I just put a link in the chat for you to see to leave, so that you can. And again, I don't believe in ambush scholarship, right? I'm not going to say something unless I'm able to source it and for other people to look at it. But yeah, if you want to know a little bit more about that, which I think is very fascinating, I put a link to start you off with, and I'm gonna drop 2 books in the chat for you to take a look at. Okay, so you can see what Joel was trying to convey.
Okay. So
You breaking up.
can you hear? I
Yeah,
got.
there you go.
Okay, I'm behind the wheel, so I can't like read and drive at the same time. But okay.
Hey man, that's fair enough.
Oh yeah, there's no need to read anything. That's why I was sharing the information with you. I also put a link. This is for you too, Yoel, in the chat. This article right here. This was written by Rabbi Bleich. And Rabbi Bleich, he was a spiritual leader of the congregation B'nai Yehuda in New York City. And he wrote a lot of works on halakhic literature and things along those lines. And he wrote an article on Black Jews, a halakhic perspective, right?
Mm.
And pretty much his premise was that I don't know if y'all know the history of this community. Is a book called Stepping into Zion. Matter of fact, where's Mordecai? Mordecai still there? Mordecai, you there? Yeah, he went back on his journey. Well, anyway, I wanted to see if he was familiar. Maybe Leave may know about this. The history of the Da'ad Harishon.
It's not
You
posting what
familiar?
you posted. The room is kind of slowing down, so I'm not. I don't. I see the link you posted from NCBI.
Okay. I don't know.
The
Maybe.
genetic ancestry of African Americans. That's a good book. Thank you.
Okay. I sent it
But
again. Yeah,
yeah,
the
nah.
chat's not letting me do it.
And you know why that's
Man, that's
happening,
crazy.
guys? Because we in a great room. Our people are controlling it. The topic of conversation is not being gate kept. That's why that's happening.
Yeah.
Yo, can you back channel that to
Yeah.
me,
Yeah. I sent it to you.
please?
I sent it to you. And what I was saying was there's a very fascinating history that I think we all in here should learn. Let me drop this book in here too. It's called Stepping into Zion, the Hatza'ad Harishon, Black Jews and the Remaking of Jewish Identity. And people may not know who the Hatza'ad Harishon community is, but they were one of the few Jewish communities on this side of the world, right, in America, that actually opened their doors to Black Jews and were advocating that Black Jews were authentic Jews. A lot of people don't know about that history. Like, there's a lot of history that people don't know about, and I think that's only because of the dissolution of this type of history, right? Like if you learn about these Jewish groups, right, who don't look nothing like those who are purportedly called African Americans in here, and that's outside of our ethnic disposition, and we identify or call them white Jews, right? It's interesting you don't say white Jews, which is crazy, but as white Jews, and you'll see that there were several communities that were advocating with a loud voice that these Black Jews are authentic Jews. And then
Wow.
you can kind of see the outrage from the general Jewish community that, hell no, that's not the case. This is actually a stereotype that goes back thousands of years, actually about 1,500 years. I'd also made a mention of Eldad
Send me that
Hadani
too,
earlier.
Baba
Oh, yeah,
Kasha.
yeah.
I'm still
Had
waiting for it to come through. If you sent it already, but if you
no,
haven't
no, no.
sent it yet,
I'm gonna try to send this other one. Let me see if this one goes through.
now
But that's
now Mir, I just want to let you know that you're here. Mir, the only rule in this room is let the conversation that's currently happening finish. Don't just jump in there. Other than that, this room is moderated on a totally different level than where we were earlier. Be mindful of that. Go ahead, Duran.
yeah. So what I was saying, and I think the other link, it crept in. So y'all let me know if y'all get it. Did y'all get it?
Yeah, I see both of
Let me
them.
know
I
if
see
you see
both
it.
of them.
All right, cool.
Well,
And
Google Drive links.
yeah, Google Drive links.
Okay, cool.
So also what I did was I put another book in there. And again, I want to make sure I'm sourcing everything that I'm talking about. The last book the last link I'm trying to put, it's not letting me do it, is the one on the slave breeding practices and the intercontinental slave trade that a lot of people are unfamiliar with, right? That's very important because you start to learn the history of how slaves are bred. And when people think that the slave master is raping all the slaves, that's crazy
That's
because the
madness.
history doesn't agree with it and the DNA doesn't agree with that, right? But anyway, going back to what I was saying. So when you start to learn the history of these Knesset communities, these Jewish communities that has like a synagogue at the center and they have a community around, that's what a Knesset is, that they start adopting or bringing in these Black Jews. And upon conversion, right? And they say conversion is pretty much just formal, right? They start coming out and advocating that, yeah, they have a real lineage to being Jews. And this community is advocating for them. And obviously, the community is not going to last long after that. So once they did that, they had a few more years left in them, and that was the end of them. But pretty much, that was something that was taboo. How the hell can you have a Black Jew? And this is why when I mentioned earlier, the issue that I see from the Jews who come from Babli or Babylon, right, and the ones who are the overseers of the Talmudic traditions, they were very staunch on not accepting Jews outside of the knowledge of the Talmud. You know what I'm saying? Because I gave an example of a particular individual, Eldad Hadani. And again, he's the individual responsible for the Jews looking into the Beta Israel in Ethiopia. He brought the attention to that region that happened hundreds of years after him. You know what I'm saying? That they were just
Come,
shocked that there could be Black Jews that exist.
come.
So much so that
Mm.
you had the Gaon in Europe sending letters to these tribes in East Africa because of the things that Eldad Hadani believed, asking them in the 18th century for guidance and assistance, Black Jews, asking them for guidance and assistance because they're going through a crisis in Europe and being persecuted by people other than the Jewish community. Very fascinating history when you look at this stuff, right? But I say all this to say, also for you, brother Leib, I don't know if he's there. Janice H. Levy is she's an author that has written an article that's called Beyond the Saharan Cloak. And one thing that she did in that article was she kind of she was reprimanding academia because of their lack of acknowledgement of the history undertaken by Jews and that's south of the Saharan realm. And the one thing she was saying, and she showed, and she's from UCLA, and that's where she got her doctorate and everything from. And actually, she actually wrote a section or a portion or essay in the book by Edith Bruder that she published. And Edith Bruder, she's an author. She's a French Jew, and she worked with Tudor Parfit and creating an organization to test the authenticity of African Jewry, right? So Janice Levy had wrote a essay in that, and pretty much what she was positing in that essay and the other essays she wrote was that academia is missing the mark in identifying Black Jews in West Africa because they don't understand the crypto Jew element that occurred amongst those tribes in those regions. And because of such, those individual groups that do undertake what's called, so crypto When you are a crypto Jew, that means outwardly you practice whatever the religion is in your society, but inwardly you keep your ancestral customs and traditions, right? And you do that internally. And you do that because what you're doing internally will be persecuted if you practice it openly, right? So she goes on in the migration routes of these Jews amongst the sub-Saharan region and how they needed to identify as crypto Jews, where they openly express the religion of the culture they're amongst, but secretly behind closed doors express their religion for sake of persecution, isolation, and for being exiled out of those regions. You know what I'm saying? And she wrote an excellent article on that. I'm going to post that in the chat in case he's interested in seeing that. And the reason why I said that that's important is because on my mother's lineage, on my mother's side, she's a descendant from Black Jews that was on the coast of the central west coast of Africa, right? From the communities in which the Vili peoples had dominated that region, and they were slave trading with the Danes, and then later on with the Portuguese, etc. Right, where you had a concentration of Black Jews there that was documented and recording to exist there. Even Tudor Parfit, who is the expert in African Jewry, and he is extremely doubtful of African Americans all being from Israel or whatever. So he's a skeptic on that. He himself also acknowledges the coast of Black Jews in Loango, right, and their emigration to Loango, and how their acknowledgement in the broader Jewish world brought a lot of excitement to say, oh, they're Jews, and they start terming them Black Jews. They couldn't just be a Jew; they had to be a Black Jew, which is a derogatory term, by the way. Oh, there's Black Jews that's all the way on that coast. And whenever they get word of some Jews somewhere and they don't look like them, a whole conversation ensues, right, on their authenticity and how could this be and so forth. Even though they know that the Jews were scattered in exile, to know that there's a functioning community that has their own halakha, that have maintained their own heritage and that have maintained their own tongue in distant lands, because they're not in Babylon, they're not in Israel, but yet outside of these places, except for those who have migrated from those two regions towards Europe, all of a sudden you have Jews that are able to keep their identity, Jews that were able to develop their own halakha amongst their own Knesset communities, Jews that was able to actually observant and was actually able to actually recite portions of the written Torah. How is this possible? You see that? It becomes like a spectacle. How is this possible? Oh my God. It's like it's like it's impossible for that to happen. So those of us, whether you're a convert to Judaism or those who identify ethnically as a Jew, it's good to know this history to see that when this idea of a Black Jew is actually existed and they're authenticated, how much of an outroar or a spectacle it becomes, you begin to see why there's such a controversy around those who self-identify today. It's a big controversy because now, instead of accepting it off the strength of its basis, right? Because you can be fluid, gender fluid, and all of that, and be accepted. But the moment that you say that you're a Jew and you try to bring some documentation or stuff behind it, it's questioned, right? The fact that it's still becoming a spectacle today is nothing new. This has been going on for hundreds, over 1,000 or so years. And once you learn the history of it, you see the root of where it comes from. And that is, how is it possible that Jews can flourish in these extant and remote places without the Talmud, without our sages, without our rabbis? How is that possible? Have you heard of this group? Have you heard of that group? Did you sanction them? Did you convert them? That's the whole conversation that surrounds that. And it becomes problematic. At least to me, it becomes problematic because that's a disenfranchisement of the claim that these groups make of being Jews, even though they can existentially in their material culture demonstrate that they have retained that identity. Now, maybe not as fluid, as concentrated as other groups that have not suffered that amount of exile or persecution, where they had to go very far, right? Where they can stay close to what was termed the Middle East, but those in distant lands who were able to do that. How is that possible? How could they have survived there with this culture? How in the world could there be Black Jews in this region? And we have to look at this term Black that's being placed on them. And maybe it's a derogatory term. Maybe they're not people of color that actually identify as a Jew. It's a whole, episode that I think that we all should explore when a question like that is asked. Do you believe that? Why not? What is your premise for disbelieving that? Are you aware of the history behind this? Or is there any credence to this being true? Even if it's haphazardly mixed, right? Do you know the history about those that existed in these regions, in these areas, right? Why was it such a big deal if they were Jews and they were black? Why does it have to be a conversion of some kind of yeshiva, right? That's instructing them on Torah, right? That they maintain Torah without a yeshiva. How is that possible? How was they able to develop this highly advanced halacha in their environment without anybody overseeing it, without the Talmud as its precedence? How is this possible? And to me, I think that that's a crime and it's extremely egregious that that is how that community views those in these areas of the world. Historically and until this day, they're still fighting to authenticate African Jewry. Because how is this possible? Oh, these are fables made up. Oh, that's not a real oral tradition that you're gleaming from. Now, I admit there are some that are not authentic. So I'm going to say that as well. I'm not saying all of them are, but the ones that do have a case still face a hard time. And I think that that's unfair, and that should be brought to the table in these discussions. And I yield.